Streaming. Yeah, streaming. There, I got this chair in the shot. Don't need that to be in the shot. Farewell. We did it. We did it. Another day. More streaming. We're streaming away. Oh yeah, I used to sing that a lot, didn't I? Yeah. Oh, well, the times they change. The times they change. Change that. Click here. Hello, my dears. How are you today? Finally, had a good night sleep last night. Just slept and slept and slept and slept. Oh, so good, guys. It was so good just to be in a nice little ball and just sleep and get to sleep in. Didn't have to. Even my little dog is gone. He's over at my ex's and just spent the day just drinking coffee, going for my walk. It's a nice day today, guys. It was a nice day today. And it's still going to be a nice day. I'm going to do the stream, and then I'm going to do some voice recording, right? I've got a project that I need to do. I'm going to take care of that. Probably not finish it, obviously. That'd be a lot, but get a good chunk of it done. Hope you're all doing really well out there, out in the world. Today's stream is going to be really climate change focused. It's going to have a real climate change sort of a theme to it because, and this is the exciting one, I'm going to jump right into it. From The Guardian, climate crisis, climate crimes. Exxon must go to trial over alleged climate crimes. Court rules. The ruling and another crucial court decision this week will force the company to face charges it lied about global heating. Good to see you, Cotton, by God. What happened, Cotton? Anemone, good to see you. Eric, good to see you guys. Super good to see you guys. I'm glad you're here. I'm actually really excited about this news. I gotta tell you. I have been saying on this channel for a year now that I will not take any institution seriously, any corporation, any government, anyone seriously in regards to the climate change catastrophe until the people responsible for disseminating disinformation and lies into the public are in jail, not fined, not facing some kind of thing or all this sort of stuff, in prison. And here we have a ruling that's taking us one step closer to that being an actual reality. From The Guardian by Chris McGreal. The Massachusetts High Court on Tuesday ruled that the U.S.'s largest oil company, ExxonMobil, must face a trial over accusations that it lied about the climate crisis and covered up the fossil fuel industry's role in worsening environmental devastation. Exxon claimed the case, brought by the Massachusetts Attorney General, Maura Healey, was politically motivated and amounted to an attempt to prevent the company from exercising its free speech rights. But the state's Supreme Judicial Court unanimously dismissed the claim in the latest blow to the oil industry's attempt to head off a wave of lawsuits across the country over its part in causing global heating. Healey's lawsuit accuses Exxon of breaking the state's consumer protection laws with a decades-long cover-up of what it knew about the impact on the climate of burning fossil fuels. The state also says the company deceived investors about the risks to its business posed by global warming. Good to see you, Major. And you grinning. Exxon, and you, Nova Scotia. I don't know if I'm so happy you're all here. Exxon claimed the lawsuit was in breach of legislation against what are known as strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPs, used by wealthy individuals and corporations to silence critics. The Massachusetts court ruled that anti-SLAP laws do not apply to government cases. Healy, who is running for governor, hailed the ruling as a resounding victory in our work to stop Exxon from lying to investors and consumers in our state. In March, a federal court also refused to put a block on the state's legal action and ruled that Exxon was obliged to turn over documents to investors. The oil industry suffered another defeat on Monday when a federal appeals court ruled that a lawsuit by Rhode Island against 21 fossil fuel companies, including Exxon, BP, and Shell, can go ahead in state court. Fossil fuel companies are attempting to move cases into what they regard as the more friendly forum of federal courts. Among other things, state systems often permit a much broader discovery process, which could force Exxon and other companies to hand over highly embarrassing documents revealing what they knew about the climate crisis and when and how they responded. At least 10 other federal courts across the country have rejected the industry's attempt to get similar cases out of the state systems. Richard Wiles, president of the Center for Climate Integrity, welcomes the latest ruling to keep the process in state courts. The ruling is a major victory for Rhode Island, which is now one step closer to putting oil and gas corporations on trial for fueling the climate crisis, lying about it, and then sticking the state's taxpayers with the bill for damages, he said. 4 circuit courts in a row have now handed major defeats to big oil companies in these cases, rejecting the industry's efforts to escape accountability. So far this year, federal appeals courts made similar rulings in Colorado, Maryland, and California. In March, a Hawaii state court gave the go-ahead for a case to remain within its jurisdiction. Honolulu's lawsuit alleges that the oil giants engaged in a coordinated, multi-front effort to deny the threat posed by global heating, to discredit the science of climate change, and to deceive the public about the reality and consequences of the impacts of their fossil fuel pollution. The chair of Honolulu City Council, Tommy Waters, called it a big and important win. We are facing incredible costs to move critical infrastructure away from our coasts and out of flood zones. And the oil companies that deceived the public for decades should be the ones helping pick up the tab for those costs, not our taxpayers, he said. The reason these companies are fighting so hard to block this case is they don't want even more evidence to come out. This is just like Big Tobacco when they tried to take advantage of the public. Clara Olafson, don't know if I've ever seen you here before, Clara. Good to see you. Good to see you. Hello, beautiful souls. Absolutely. This is a story that I am going to be following very, 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 very closely. The people responsible for this climate catastrophe, the people, and let's be really clear about what the actual complaint is, okay? It is totally understandable that a group of monkeys who get a hold of oil and are like, oh, wow, look at what this dude's, it make us go fast, right? Makes total sense that we would stumble stupidly towards some kind of catastrophe, right? Like, that's not the complaint. The complaint is that they knew about it. Their own scientists and their own people were telling them repeatedly and over and over and over again, this is going to cause environmental destruction on a massive scale. And not only did they ignore it, they have actively pursued a path of lying and disinformation in order to deceive people about the realities of it. These people are psychopathic mass murderers. That's the only way to discuss them. And if the only punishment they face is a fine, there has been no justice whatsoever. These people need to be incarcerated and treated as badly as the Nazis, as far as I am concerned, for their evil, duplicitous lying. Clara, I have watched every stream since like a month back. I love it here. Oh, fantastic, Clara. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm a steadily growing channel. I'm trying my best. I'm just trying to get word out there, trying to let people know like what the hell is going on. Christopher De Silva, hi John, if it really matters, who should I vote for in this coming election? Incredibly torn between Liberals and NDP. Just really want Ford out. What do? I think the best thing for you to do, bud, because the reality of our stupid system, take a look, see who actually does, like, this is the strategic voting line that I'm going to give you, right? Like, at the end of the day, if your goal is to just get Ford out, look at your polls, look at your data, right? Yeah, there's plenty available in your riding. Which way are people going, and go that way, right? Go Liberal, go NDP, right? Like, it's a first past the post system. It's the stupidest system we have that exists, but it's ours. If you think it's unrealistic, if you think that it's unlikely that it's going to actually break one way or the other, then vote communist. Just to get it out there, just to get it into the system that people want more pressure and more energy, right? Well, Clara, this is the reality, right? Like, I know for myself, isolation is key for these psychopaths, right? That the parasite class requires us to be isolated from one another. And I know for a fact that there are plenty of people who think this way, but they feel isolated and they feel unable to actually have their opinion voiced. And when they turn on their TV and when they turn on the CIA and CSIS propaganda that goes for media these days, they're not hearing the narrative that they are coming up with in their own consciousness, right? And so that's really what this channel is about, is to tell people, not just each other, not just people who agree with each other, but to signal to the parasitic psychopath class that their time is up. It's over for them. That the game is up. Voices like mine are rising. Voices like ours are being heard. And these psychopaths are going to see a reckoning. And here's the reckoning right here, right in front of their faces. We are going to destroy these institutions on purpose and steadily. You know the narrative of the millennials destroyed the diamond market, the millennials destroy this, the millennials destroy that. The millennials are going to destroy this institutional oligarchy. That's what we're going to do. And when we do it, the few boomers who are left crying about it, we're going to laugh and mock them. That's the goal. The small group of psychos who still are defending this absolute destruction of our civilization. Our job is to ridicule them endlessly and mercilessly, and to make it obvious to everyone in the world that this old psychotic way of thinking is over. Yeah, I feel like I just stepped out of their gaslighting cult, and that's all it is. That's all it is. Once you understand that it's a gaslighting cult, and it is a death cult, that's the goal, right? The objective is to destroy the species. Once you understand that it's all gaslighting, like, you can never listen to someone like Jordan Peterson again once you understand that he just gaslights people. Like, that's his whole thing. He's just a gaslighter, right? He ignores evidence, facts, right? He just obfuscates everything. That's his whole job, is to just obfuscate, right? Because that's what gaslighters do. And once you understand that, like, all they've got is gaslighting, they don't have facts, evidence, reality. They don't have anything. Like who are the most prominent voices on the right? It's people like Peterson and Shapiro, who outright stand in front of you and say, I have a magic book that has all the answers. Like, literally. We have them on tape repeatedly saying that they worship a magic book that has all the answers. It's like, time to go. Time to go. It's over, right? What we are witnessing is like the last gasp of a cult that, and the question is, how much damage are we going to let them do before they go out the door? I just finished watching a liberal video where the guy was trying to show that the Nazi problem in Ukraine is just as bad as Russia, and in a previous video tried to argue that Ukraine is not a Nazi state. After watching the video, all I'm thinking is, okay, it's a huge problem of nationalism and conservative mindset. I do not see any difference between, like, obviously, between the U.S. conservative and Russian conservative, it's the exact same mindset, which, of course, Putin has no problem with nationalism, promote many conservative values. Look, obviously, the Nazi problem in Ukraine is worse than what's going on in Russia, right? Like, Russia doesn't have neo-Nazi groups officially integrated into their military. Like, but it's not actually that fine a line, right? Like, it really is the difference between being like, well, I don't trust that guy because he's black, and I'm going to go over there and purge that guy. That's the difference. It's not that fine a line, right? Like, do you understand the difference between being mistrustful of someone because of their skin color and actually wanting to kill that person because of their skin color? Like, do you think that's a fine line? I don't. Like, I don't. I don't think that that's a fine line at all. Like, if somebody stands up and says, I don't trust Jews, that's racist. If someone says, I want to round up all the Jews and put them in incinerators and murder them, that makes you a Nazi. Pretty straightforwardly. And it's not a fine distinction. Right? It's not a fine distinction. Like, it's the Nazi apologists that are coming out of the woodworks more and more and more are doing everything they can to pretend as though this rising Nazi threat that is coming out of Ukraine, and let's be extremely clear, I don't make the claim that Ukraine is a Nazi state. I don't make that claim because I think it's more complex. It's there's a lot going on, but it's rising, right? It's a rising energy. It's a rising power. All of the signs are there that Nazis, legit Nazis, are going to seize power in Ukraine because they're being empowered. That the political groups that are actually receiving funding and are actually receiving power and are actually becoming empowered in Ukraine are Nazis. And the groups that are trying to fight against that are actively being banned, actively being pushed out, actively being removed from power. Like, and it all comes down to a very simple reality, which is that the Nazis are willing to do murder. The Nazis are willing to do what NATO and the United States wants them to do, right? They're willing to go out there and commit crimes, and they're willing to go out and fight a fight. And the United States doesn't care that they're saying we want to ethnically cleanse Russians, right? Because they're willing to fight. They're willing to fight the Russians, and that's all they want, right? Like, so so Ukraine itself is not a Nazi regime yet, but it's there. That timeline is unfolding in front of us, and we definitely could head down that path. Like, and I'm like, certainly what's happening in Russia and certainly what exists in Russia could be described as nationalist, but like, that's what happens when you're constantly at war. Like, I don't know what to tell you on that front. Like, that obviously a people who are feeling under pressure and but they're not purging people. They're not actively going around declaring that they want to purge anybody, right? Like, to try to equate Putin's Russia to Nazism, it's childish. It's just childish, right? There's no such thing as a secret Nazi regime, right? There's no such thing as like an underground, like, let's all like wink and nod and nudge, right? That's why like people who like to accuse our conservatives of being Nazis, it's like, nah. Like, Nazis are very open. They want to be open. They want to be known. They like, that's part of the power, right? Is that they want it to be normalized. They want it to be understood that we are Nazis. We are here to purge ethnic groups. That is what we are doing. There's no such thing as like we're not Nazis. Wink. No, it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. It's like what I say with the fake Uyghur genocide narrative. There's just no such thing as a secret genocide. It can't happen. It literally can't happen. On basic organizational premises, it can't happen. So, Putin is more like Bernie Sanders with a bad attitude. Look, Putin, in my perspective, the more I research and the more I listen and the more I focus in on Putin, the more I see that he really views himself primarily as a Russian. And this gets this gets interpreted as nationalist, but I think it's as normal as it can be, right? That he finds himself as the leader of a people and he wants to do well by them. And if you were to try to define him, right? Communist, socialist, fascist, conservative, liberal, neoliberal, all of these kinds of things, I kind of look at it and I go, no, I think Putin is just a Russian who sees Russians as Russians and is trying to do right by Russians. And if he sees that something is going to work for his people, he'll do it. He'll do it. That's it. And it doesn't matter. Like, he's not an ideologue of any sort. I think that's really what it comes down to, is that Putin is like, he doesn't view politics and he doesn't view his role ideologically at all. I think he's extraordinarily practically minded. I think that he looks at situations and he tries to judge them for what they are, right? And when he moves forward with ideas, he's not moving forward with an idea based on an ideology of like free market principles or anything like this. He's standing there saying, what's going to work? What's going to work? This is what we want to see. How do we get there? And if it means acting like old school Stalinists, he'll do it. And if it means being a free market neoliberal, he'll do it. It just, as long as it works. Because I think that he wants to do what's right for Russians first. Your do is badass, by the way, thank you. I used to have a mohawk, but nature cured me of that. I had a man bun do, cut it off before it was referred to as a man bun. Oh, good for you, bud. So you got to do it when it was kind of cool, and then you got out right as it kind of got lame, right? I'm like ahead of the trends. I hate Nazis. Yeah, Adam, we hate Nazis before it was cool, right? I'm so looking forward to when it becomes cool to hate Nazis again. Like, when you stand up and say, like, fuck Nazis, and people go, like, yeah, instead of being like, well, I don't know, Nazis, like the way that we do now, with our sort of stupid shuffling. Thank you. I actually really like, I'm really digging the hair. I'm hoping that what I want to do with the hair, little hair segue, not talking about politics, talking about personal fashion. Oh no, hair tie catastrophe. Hair tie catastrophe. Okay, what I'm hoping to do, like you see that my hair does this, right? It goes like this. I want it to come down here is what I want it to do. I want to get it over the shoulder, and it's getting there. Every day it's getting a little longer, and I just want it to come down just like this so I can have it cascading. Putin is more like Bernie Sanders with a bad attitude. For me, I do argue that it is a Nazi state because the military is able to carry their own political goal while the Ukraine government supports their endeavor. Yeah, I mean, that's a wrinkle in it, right? Like the Nazis aren't listening to Zelensky. But I'm not yet satisfied to call it like a full-blown Nazi state because there's not enough popular support. Like first of all, Zelensky himself is not a Nazi. I don't believe that at all, right? But definitely the ground has been, like, he definitely seeded the ground so that a true Nazi can cede power. Like, don't get me wrong, like, it's a very dangerous moment what's happening, for sure. And I suspect that we are going to see, a big reason why I think we need to be specific with this is that, like, we don't want to get into a boy who cried wolf sort of situation, you know? Like, we don't want to get into the situation where we're constantly saying, like, it's Nazis, it's Nazis, it's Nazis, it's Nazis, it's Nazis. And then when it's, like, fucking Nazis, and it's, like, really obvious, then no one will listen. Because we've always been saying it's Nazis, and it hasn't been, like, completely... And, like, it is going, like... And, Eric, I think the reality, right, and the reason why I think we should step down from the Nazi thing a little bit, is that people are not going to be convinced until literally the leader of Ukraine is doing Nazi salutes. Like, it's just the truth. And until people are actually seeing the leader of Ukraine doing Nazi salutes with the tanks driving by, right? Until they actually see that image, they're just not going to buy into it. They're just not going to buy into it. People don't want to engage in the conversation. They don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe that their own governments are responsible for funding these sorts of things. They just don't want to believe it. And so, like, and there's nothing we can do. Like, there's nothing, like, we can keep talking about it amongst ourselves and all this kind of stuff, but, like, for fuck's sake, we're still voting Doug Ford here. Like, this is how dumb we are. Yeah, this is a fair critique of Putin for sure. The anti-LGBTQ and all of that kind of stuff for sure. And I think that's a general critique that you can lay on Russian society, generally. That one hopes that they come into a progressive mindset about LGBTQ issues and identity issues. Cultures develop at their own pace. That's all it really comes down to. Cultures develop at their own pace, and one hopes that there'll be some kind of breakthrough or some kind of movement, right? And we'll see. Support for that idea. Along that point, I don't think Putin is unique, though. I think that's the thing, is that I think that Putin, in those views, is fairly consistent with the views of his fellow Russian citizens. So it's not like he's on the fringe with that kind of thinking. Quick question, does Putin even have the space to be an ideologue? Or is his office so packed with moment-to-moment issues he has to be as best as he can? I think, yeah, you're probably onto something there, Cotton. That's probably right. Like, does he really have the space to be an ideologue even, right? Like, I feel like if I'm Putin and if I'm in that office, like, my whole job is just putting out fires or starting them. Like Justin? Fucking Trudeau. What a loser. Trudeau's legacy is going to just be one big fart sound, right? Like, literally, here's Justin Trudeau's entire legacy. That's his whole legacy. The guy's going to be 80, being like, why didn't I actually rule? Salvador Allende was part of the Chilean government for 40 years since 1930s and ran for president on 4 different occasions. The CIA was involved before September 1923 and spent $2.6 million USD to fund the opposition candidate Eduardo Frei Montalva's election campaign in 1964. Fantastic. The CIA just getting fucking involved in everything, right? Yeah, it turns out that if you give like hundreds of billions of dollars to a rogue terrorist organization, they use it. Yeah, I think this is it. Like, Putin just, I just think that he really, like, and I just think he's dealing with this office on a day-to-day, like, putting plans forward and all this kind of stuff as best that he can, and he's going to let the historians decide what his ideology was. Like, I don't think Putin himself knows what his ideology is, really. Like, I think that he's just sort of a man, like, he's a man of the time that he's in, you know? He just happens to be the guy that got kind of selected for this. And what's funny about Putin is, like, he did get, like, selected to a certain degree, right? That, like, the neoliberal death cult wanted Putin in because they sort of viewed Putin as a continuation of the Gorbachev-Yeltsin capitulation, right? that they thought that Putin was going to continue selling Russians out, right? And which isn't to say that Putin like got in and immediately started slaying oligarchs, and like to a certain degree, Putin has maintained the oligarchy, right? Putin has just maintained it, but I haven't seen anything credible that convinces me that he has worsened this or made this issue. And I've seen plenty that shows that Putin has confronted capitalists in his own country from time to time when they've done the things that capitalists do, right? And I don't think he's confronting the capitalists because he's like for the glory of the workers or the or for the communist project or anything. He's literally like, the factory needs to run. We need the goods from the factory. Run the factory. Like it's that simple, you know? And like so he is just kind of like non-ideological. He just wants the factories to run. He's a very interesting figure to be in charge of such a powerful economy at this moment in time. Like I understand why people try to describe him as a dictator, because that is kind of how he walks around, you know? All right. Actually, there is something we can do. Every person who works in a school building should stop coming to work. Every single one, all across the country. Stall the economy and demand sensible gun laws. Until they pass, we don't work. Yeah, who's been saying this for a while now? Right? Like, literally everybody should stop working. Like, we should go on strike. It should be a mass general strike. Like, I don't understand why anyone gets in their car and goes to work. It doesn't make any fucking sense to me at all. Right? The question whether or not Ukraine is a Nazi state much more complex, people don't want to get into. That's right. It comes back to the question of what is a state, and the more you dig deeper into the question of what is a state, the more complex the state is, and more than just here the government, and the government is the state. Yet, for the example, the police force is part of the state apparatus, but they don't have any governmental power. Well, and people don't like to think, like, it is complex. Like, people don't like to think, like everybody wants to believe that, like, Zelensky's in control, and he's got hold of the reins of power, and, like, all this kind of stuff, but the military doesn't listen to him. So it's like, you know? Like, there's Ukraine is a deeply corrupt place. Like, deeply corrupt. And everybody's in it for themselves. So, and people don't really understand what that means, you know? Like, it's frustrating because, like, you take a look at what happened in Libya, you take a look at what happened in Yugoslavia, you look at what's happening in Yemen, in Palestine, right? Like, you take a look at these places, and it's the same fucking story. Like Iraq, Afghanistan, right? Somalia, all throughout South America, all throughout Africa. It's the same goddamn story. The United States comes in, funds far-right extremist groups who want to do violence, trains them, arms them, and sends them in to do a coup, right? It's the same story every single time. And yet, when it comes to Ukraine, it's impossible. It can't be that way, right? It can't possibly be the fact that we're funding neo-Nazi groups in order to do the very thing that we've been doing for decades. Like, people are just not prepared. They just don't want to do it, right? The rules are different in Ukraine because Ukraine is white. Like, that's what it's come down to. That if I tell this narrative about a nation that's full of brown people, right, everybody will bob their head along and then go to work, right? But if you tell that exact same narrative in a nation full of white people, and instead of it being ISIS, it's Nazis, right? Nope. Can't be real. Can't be real, right? Our government is corrupt, but it's not that corrupt. It's not evil. Yeah, we're just not ready. We're just not ready for it. Electric cars and lithium extraction threaten to drive even more climate harm. No shit. No shit. The climate emergency, this is from Truth Out, written by Adriana Darokwi. The climate emergency is almost universally seen by nations of the world as a threat to future survival. But approaches to mitigate it that are promoted by policymakers in the global north focus on so-called net zero emissions, based on dubious carbon trading schemes to maintain current lifestyles and business as usual. But in the global south, popular environmentalism relates to the struggle to achieve fair ecological distribution, to defend community access to natural resources, and to protect people's livelihoods, all of which are threatened not only by climate change but unequal burdens placed on the global south by so-called nature-based solutions. This has been seen quite dramatically in programs such as reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation that has led to displacement of native cultures in order to convert or commodify ecosystems into assets to be traded as carbon offsets for carbon-emitting industries. Moreover, green policies that promote renewable energy, technology such as solar panels, wind turbines, and electric batteries, threaten to do even more harm to ecosystems in extraction areas by destroying biodiversity, contaminating water, and causing social and environmental damage to local indigenous communities. As underscored in the latest United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures above pre-industrial levels is imminent, and temperature increases could even exceed this level. As the planet moves towards this daunting benchmark, renewable energy technology is being heralded as crucial in efforts to rapidly decarbonize global energy systems. Moreover, the concept of shifting to renewable energies with a full transition to wind, water, and solar energy by 2050 is presented by technology companies as both technically and economically feasible, with few downsides. The transition to a low-carbon world, however, threatens to replicate the ecological destruction of the fossil fuel extraction system on the ecosystem of such extractive areas. As such, climate change mitigation based on renewable energy transition has become complicit in condoning ecological degradation and perpetuating violent conflicts, as well as unjust patterns of colonialism, racism, patriarchy, militarization, and structural violence. In this sense, climate mitigation consequences are not distributed equally, nor are they experienced by a uniform set of actors. In fact, they threaten to exacerbate the climate debt to the global south. The most recent UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, COP26, delivered the Glasgow Climate Pact, in which 153 countries committed to securing near global net zero emissions. The proposal includes a mitigation plan to accelerate the switch to electric vehicles, in which more than 30 countries, 6 major vehicle manufacturers, and major cities set out their determination for all new car and van sales to reach zero emissions by 2040 globally, and by 2035 in leading markets. The electrification of cars for decarbonization and the Paris Agreement and Glasgow Climate Pact requirements are examples of the same colonialist, extractivist business as usual and involve many environmental consequences while failing to cut carbon emissions at their source. First, electric vehicles have a substantial carbon footprint because they require batteries made of lithium, a non-renewable resource stored in prehistoric water on indigenous land. The process for mining lithium requires taking a large amount of water from vulnerable ecosystems, which disrupts their fragile natural balance. Second, reducing emissions also depends on how electric vehicles are used post-production, because charging electric vehicles relies on local electrical grids. Where electrical grids run on coal, electrical vehicles may increase carbon dioxide emissions, which adds another layer to energy demand. The electrification of cars, as proposed by European and American policies, also reproduces the current model of individual car use, and does not relieve congestion in crowded cities. Lithium-ion batteries were launched in the 1990s and were gradually introduced in consumer electronics. The internal chemistry of lithium, light, conductive, and energy-dense, allows it to recharge electricity quickly and efficiently. Lithium-ion batteries turn out to be many times more energy efficient than nickel, metal hybrid equivalent, and these appealing properties have positioned lithium as a commodity that is central to the future of decarbonization of the energy, electronics, and automobile industries. Lithium demand for the manufacture of rechargeable batteries has doubled in less than 10 years, and it is projected to increase fivefold by 2025. These predictions were made before the COP26, a process that is directly related to carbon mitigation policies. Sustainable, contemporary, responsible, reflective, and adapted to the 21st century, lithium is frequently framed as an environmentally benign resource that differs significantly from more impactful extractive resources, such as ores and fossil fuel. However, many of the extractive concessions awarded to lithium companies overlap with ancestral indigenous territories, communal lands, and protected ecological areas. The extraction of lithium in these areas have also been associated with multiple ecological risks that involve waste generation, landscape change, contamination of surface salts and body waters, the impact of flora and fauna. Lithium extraction from mineral and brine deposits has been shown to deplete local water sources. In Chile, lithium is extracted from underground brine found at Atacama Salt Flat, one of the driest places on Earth. Lithium mining in the Atacama Desert impacts biodiversity, depletes water, and displaces indigenous communities in extraction areas. Communities that have been marginalized and criminalized by the government for no reason other than their occupation of this resource-rich land. Chile has one of the most significant reservoirs of lithium in the world, and due to the characteristics of the reserve, lithium is relatively cheap to obtain. However, in contrast to what occurs with oil and coal, small numbers of countries have the largest reserves and production of lithium, and these countries are concentrated in the southern hemisphere. In the Atacama Desert, lithium is obtained from salty water drawn from the depths of the land, then extracted using a chemical process. For the first step, companies drain more than 63 billion liters of salty water per year. For the second part of the process, companies use and contaminate fresh water. Although mining companies argue that the water pumped from the underground of the desert is not used for human consumption, a rich variety of microorganisms that grow there nourish local species. Furthermore, the amounts of water extracted from the Atacama Desert exceed what the groundwater can generate sustainably. A single electric vehicle battery requires 63 kilograms of lithium carbonate. Each ton of lithium carbonate, or the equivalent for 14 electric vehicles, requires the evaporation of 2 million liters of water, the equivalent of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The central impact of lithium extraction in Chile relates to water use because the process involves the extraction of significant volumes of water from below the salt flats that cannot be sustainably replenished at the same rate that the water is pumped out. Brine extraction from the underground of the salt flats reduces the availability of fresh water in other areas of the salt flat for plants, animals, and human consumption. Due to the lack of water, indigenous communities who inhabit the area have had to reduce their agricultural and pastoral activities, growing corn, quinoa, and potatoes, and raising small-scale Andean livestock like guancos, llamas, and alpacas, while new generations have chosen to work in the mines or migrate to the cities to obtain a livelihood. Moreover, the increasing evaporation in the area and the higher land and lagoon temperatures have provoked local climate change that has directly affected the fragile biodiversity around the salt flats, reducing animal populations and plant survival. The pressure to extract lithium from the salt flats will continue if rudimentary evaporation technology remains one of the cheapest technologies. The populations of the Atacama Salt Flat are in areas distant from the most important urban centers, and they constitute mostly small towns, communities, or ALIS of between 50 to 500 inhabitants, except along strategic commercial routes. This region has been home to human settlements for millennia, including for the Liccan Ante, Kula, Kencha, and Aymara peoples. These communities have traditionally relied on agriculture, livestock rearing, and small-scale commerce. The presence of mining companies further impacts these local communities. These impacts include the loss of their livelihoods, the extinction of plants for medicinal use, and internal conflicts regarding how to spend the royalties that the communities receive from the mining companies. Additional problems include theft, drug addiction, and alcoholism among community members. Mining tempts young members to work in the mines for a salary and to abandon their farming traditions or to migrate to cities for better opportunities. Mining companies also affect the local economy by providing jobs to people from other regions. Lithium consumption is expected to significantly increase in the years ahead, motivated by green electromobility policies and everything related to the storage of renewable energies needed for decarbonization. This increase in demand will have extreme repercussions in the extraction zones, such as in Chile, where the mining companies request increases in the daily limits of brine extraction. The same happens in Argentina and Bolivia, because of the three countries are located in the lithium triangle. Demand may also call for the appearance of new lithium extractive projects, such as in Nevada, the United States, or Mexico. As long as the colonialist policies of resource extraction stay in place, countries in the global south that pollute the least and do not have electric vehicles will suffer the most. With an increase in lithium demand, the negative impacts of lithium consumption will worsen. Their lands are destroyed, and their water is contaminated. It is essential to learn the lesson from all the colonialist mining projects that have taken place in non-industrialized countries to work for policies that promote solid local policies to protect their land. There is a need to rethink solutions that move us away from fossil fuels and address climate change. Radical approaches are required, including drastically divesting from capitalist, colonialist life, changing the mobility matrix away from single-occupant vehicles, and challenging the paradigm of progress requires real transformation, not a mere shifting in focus within the colonialist extractive model. Like cars, right? Cars. Like gotta be, like, if you want a symbol, really, like if you want a symbol of human hubris on the massive scale, you're looking right at it right here. Cars. Just like the idea that everybody should have this like horseless carriage, right? We should all just be going around with a four-seater car that one person drives around with. And if we took all of the energy that we put into manufacturing cars, like single-use vehicles or single-passenger vehicles, and put it into mass transit, we'd have a much more robust transit system, right? That what we are facing is an imagination crisis. That's really what we're facing. That we've done everything we can to denigrate, dismantle, destroy, and punish artists and people who want to educate themselves and pursue the humanities and the arts to such a major degree that it has killed our imagination as a people. That we simply cannot imagine a world that is suitable or livable without cars. Even though cars, like, get rid of these things. Get rid of these things. Like, cars are not the solution. Cars are not the answer. It's getting kind of silly. Like, it's getting kind of silly. We're like clinging on to this idea of like, if I got a car, I'm free and I've got freedom. Like, yeah, widespread ride sharing. Like, there's in my view, there's all kinds of things that we could do, and so much of it is just tied up in the fragile male ego. Like, we're amidst a climate crisis, and the vehicles that are selling the most are the big stupid trucks, right? The big gas guzzling diesel trucks, like your gigantic Ford, GMC, and all of these sorts of things, right? These are the trucks that are still selling, trucks that are as big as World War II tanks, right? And literally the only reason these guys are buying these trucks is so that they can feel like big guys. That's it. So that they can take their fragile ego and surround it in this enormous shell and project out into the world how big and tough they are. Like, that's really what's happening, right? And maybe every so often they like connect a trailer to it and haul their toys somewhere so they can play with their toys, right? Like it's getting pretty shocking. We could abandon our auto industry with robust UBI. Auto industry is irreplaceable in Canada for the jobs industry. I mean, what we really need to be doing and what we need to be facing seriously and saying out loud, like, here's something I never hear. I never hear this. We need a war economy. We need a war economy. We need a government that isn't working with the capitalist class, but understands that we need to move through or above the capitalist class. We need a war economy. We need to restructure our economy in a serious way that takes this issue seriously. And right now, all we're doing is looking at these psychopaths who caused the problems in the first place and saying, maybe could you do something about it? What do you think we should do? We're not a serious people. We're getting exactly what we deserve. For fuck's sake, we vote for Doug Ford. Like, if you're voting for Doug Ford, like, I'm sorry, like, I don't trust you with basic things. Like, I wouldn't let you take care of my dog for a day. Like, I assume that you would do something to betray me if you're gonna vote for Doug Ford at this point. And like, it's staggering to watch. It's staggering to watch a people, when faced with such an obvious crisis, simply refuse to even say out loud, we need a war economy. This is a crisis that is as large and is as pressing as a war. And instead, we're just going to take a ton of money and send it over to Ukraine. The people in the auto industry could be retrained and put to work on working on climate solutions, a national jobs program. Same with those in the oil sector. Exactly. Yeah. The kind of thing that you would get from a war economy, right? Take a look at your major industries, transition them, transfer them over, do it swiftly, as if it's pressing, as if there's a war on, right? But we're childish. Like, this is the bottom line on it, guys. Like, this is the bottom line on this conversation, right? We are a childish people. Like, we genuinely are sitting here squalling and crying about like, and it's childishness all the way around, right? If you're denying the existence of climate change, then you're just the kid who doesn't want to admit Santa isn't real. Right? So you're childish in that kind of a way. Like, if you're still a climate change denier, you're still living in a false reality, clinging on to these hopes that reality will bend its will to you, right? The crying, squalling baby on that count. But the people on the left are just as childish, because we know what should be done, right? We have to surround the halls of power. We need to confront these psychopaths directly. We need to make their lives uncomfortable. Like, deeply and desperately uncomfortable, so that everywhere they go, they feel the pressure of humanity coming on them, and we're just not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Why? Because we're children, we're scared, we're just scared little babies, right? We still have this like savior complex, right? We still look at guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Gates as if they're going to save us, right? Well, and what are they doing? They're just running a series of cons, right? Like, obviously grifting the populace so that they can maintain their position of wealth and prestige. Like, it's pretty clear to anyone except like the childish simps, right? Like, these guys, our system of governance and our ruling class are no longer responding to rationality. They've delegitimized themselves as rulers, and it's going to get extraordinarily obvious extraordinarily soon. Like, are people going to have to genuinely experience like a famine? Are people genuinely going to have to experience like their homes burning down? Are people going to have to see their friends and family die in the streets? Like, is this what it's going to take before people start to say, hey, maybe this system is illegitimate and we should do something about it? I hope not. I hope not. But here in Ontario, we're voting Ford, like a climate change denying reckless idiot. So that it should we make it through this somehow, right? Future generations are going to be asking, like, how do we prevent this kind of moronic stupidity from happening again? How do we prevent this kind of childish bullshit from happening again? Because that's all it is. It's just childishness. Like, we could very easily start saying we have to make serious decisions and we have to do something seriously. We could very easily start doing that. And if we were grown-ups, like if we were a grown-up culture that were capable of facing these problems head on, then we would already be doing that. But that's not what we're doing. We're doing everything we can to make sure that our toys make the transition with us. That's really what it comes down to. We have to make a transition away from this death cult system, and we're desperately trying to bring our toys with us. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. Like, it's grow up time. It's grow up time. Big serious ways. And like, I regard the people voting for Doug Ford as like the worst people maybe the planet has seen. Like, if you're still voting conservative, for God's sakes, you're still voting for the destruction of the species. You're still voting to ensure that the impact of climate change is maximized, right? This is what you're voting for. This is what you're supporting. Like, it's staggering to watch. And our media is just dead silent about it. Like, Canadian media is doing everything it can to downplay this catastrophe and make sure that people don't actually understand that, like, yeah, you notice how Lytton burnt down? Well, it's going to be another city soon. It's going to be another place soon. And then another, and then another, and then another. And then before you know it, it'll be everything. Because that's how this whole fucking thing's going to work. Like, where do you think we're going? Like, what do you think is going to happen? It's pretty fucking straightforward shit. And the biggest part of the crisis is that the primary contributor to the crisis is the American military. Joe Biden just spent $40 billion in Ukraine. Like, that doesn't take a genius to figure out where this all goes. You just need to grow up and admit that reality exists, that the natural world, the earth and the universe are far more powerful than we are by huge amounts, that we don't actually know that much about it, right? And chances are really, really good that if we're the ones that are responsible for causing the problems, then us no longer participating in those problems will probably resolve the problems. Because the earth created us and everything that we exist upon. Like, it's more than capable of solving this problem itself, thank you very much. Like, we are too, and frankly, we're too stupid to figure it out. Like, that's really what it, like, I know I've said it's really what it comes down to, like 5 times, but it's the absolute truth. Like, we keep saying, how do we solve this problem? No. We don't solve this problem. We're way too stupid for that. Like, we're way too stupid for that. Our participation is not required. Or even desired. The only thing that we need to do is sit down and shut the fuck up. Like, really. Like, sit the fuck down, shut the fuck up, stop polluting, stop extracting, stop destroying, stop consuming, accept what you've got, live with it, sacrifice your toys, grow up, and let the earth heal itself. Because it's perfectly capable of doing that. Like, and this childish idea that the system that literally created us and literally created all of everything you see. Everything you see was created by the earth. We're not responsible for any of it. Any of it. Except for some of the fucking buildings you see. Like, it obviously can take care of this. We're not that powerful. We're not that important. Like, stop polluting. Incarcerate these fucking losers. Incarcerate these fucking losers. And move on. Stop with this toy bullshit. Because that's all it is. I gotta get in my little toy car and drive my little toy job that doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. Like, these jobs that we're all going to, what are they even? Like, what are they? They're just the most pointless bullshit you'll ever see in the world. Like, sure, there's like maybe like 5% of them that matter, right? There are still people responsible for farming. There are still people responsible for like the power grid and stuff. Sure. But like, there's a ton of people whose job is just to like shuffle around like fucking numbers on a screen. There's tons of people whose job is just go around and bullshit people to buy a product they don't need. There's tons of people whose job is literally to just like, oh, hey, while you're racing to that job you hate, stop by and I'll give you a cup of coffee that you can't be arsed to make at home. Like, stop all this. Like, stop all this. None of it has any legitimacy whatsoever. Our children are not going to think it had any legitimacy whatsoever. They're not going to be sitting there being like, oh, thank God everybody kept going to work. Oh, thank God everybody just kept doing what they were doing while the whole fucking place burnt down. Right? Like, stop. Just stop doing this shit. It's so fucking stupid what we're doing. Like, it's so fucking stupid. And the stupidity just keeps compounding. And so when I'm presented with these sorts of solutions, they're just stupid. It's just how a stupid person would try to solve a problem. Right? Like, and what annoys me the most, honestly, like, is that there are people who are just like aware that the catastrophe is happening and they're just sort of shrugging and being like, oh well, and then they just go to work. Like, I mean, you start talking about white privilege, right? Like, for fuck's sake. Think climate action is expensive? Inaction could cost $178 trillion. Right? Like, if you're one of those people who are out there who just heard everything I just said and you still find yourself thinking, well, but how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Because money was more important than human life. And the fake dollar bills that we just pull out of the air matter far more than the existence of all human life. But how are you going to pay for it? Well, fucking dude, how are you going to pay for it? Like, we're going to pay for it, all right. Like, we're going to pay for it, all right. Yeah, the one thing Christianity continues to fail to understand, the Bible itself says we're supposed to be caregivers in God's creation, yet we decide to dominate it instead. I mean, come on, man. We're not reading that book. Like, come on. Like, the Christians don't give a shit about the Bible at all. Not even a little. Like, not even a little. Like, they might have one around, and they might, like, have it about. And, like, the evangelicals that read it are literally, like, the magic wizard says, like, straight out. Like, the Christians don't give a fuck about their Bible. Like, I don't know what needs to be said about Christianity anymore. Like, it's making itself irrelevant. Like, that's the thing. Like, when loser hacks like Peterson stand up and cry that Judeo-Christian principles or values are fading away or any of that kind of stuff, he sounds like a crying baby, because the true reality is that Christianity itself is destroying its own legacy, right? that the people who are most responsible for ensuring that Judeo-Christian values become irrelevant are the Christians. Like, why would anyone listen to this shit? It's become insane and completely irresponsive to like basic sense. Like basic shit. Like, don't pollute the environment God created for you. Right? Like, when Christ says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, like, what do you fucking think he means? And when he says, love your neighbor as yourself, like, what do you think that means? Right? But these people don't care. Like, they don't care at all. Because the truth is that the Christianity is just a veneer to that they use to protect their true ideology, which is capital. Right? Christianity's been dead forever. Like, there's no such thing as Christianity. Who are these Christians? I've never met one. Like, I've met a ton of capitalists walking around with little T's on their chest. Right? I don't think I've ever met a Christian in my life. Who are they? Where are they? I don't know. Yeah, when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then will we realize that one cannot eat money. I think that was Sitting Bull, right? Yeah, like, we worship money. We worship money. Well, Eric, you might be the only one then. Like, we worship money. Like, that's what it is. We don't care about maintaining the ecosystem. We don't care about the abstract concept of, like, God or the one energy or any of that kind of stuff. We don't care about a philosophy that says care about one another, right? We don't care about any of that. We care about money exclusively. And if you have money, it means you're good, and if you don't have money, it means you're evil, right? And we invented it, we created it. It's the perfect projection of our childishness. The only reason that I am a socialist is because of my Christian values. All right, man. All right. Let's go. Maybe you can be the one to convince me. Because, like, my position is that Christianity is essentially an apocalyptic death cult. That it has arranged itself so that it sees all of these signs of the end times as good, because it's ushering in an apocalypse that'll bring Christ back, right? And then Christ will set everything right. So all of this is actually good, right? And we should actually accelerate the apocalypse. Like, this is not like a fringe position for Christianity at this point. That Christianity has become like an overwhelming apocalyptic death cult, and boy howdy are they going to be surprised. Oh yeah, I wanted to play this one. This is what inspired today's video.
Examples of pollution. Go stand on the bridge of the 401 and watch bumper-to-bumper traffic. That's why we're building roads and bridges and highways, to get people home quicker, that they don't have to sit in gridlock and smell someone else's fumes. One of the worst examples.
So the reason why we're building roads and bridges and highways, themselves just vomiting out as much pollution as possible, is to make sure that people can get home quicker, so that they won't have so many fumes going in the world. Here's what I love about this. Here's what I love about how stupid this is. We are running out of oil. We are running out of oil. Right? Forget about the climate change conversation. Right? We are going to go into a decline. Right? We're going to go into a major decline in terms of our ability to rely on oil. Not because we have to move because it'll be a disaster for the human race and all this, but because we're literally going to run out of it. Like, it's going to be gone. It's going to be empty. And we're building roads. It's fucking stupid. Like you can't get stupider. Like, you can't. Like, we should be investing all of that time and all of that energy building transit. Like, obviously. Doing everything we can to ensure that when we run out of oil, because we're gonna, we can transition into a type of economy or into a type of transit structure that doesn't rely on it. But we're not doing that. We're just going to go ahead and build more roads that'll be empty in 50 years. Right? Like, this highway Ford's building here, in 50 years we'll tear it down so that we can reclaim the farmland it's destroying. Like, we're heading into a food crisis. This guy's destroying farmland to build a fucking highway. And people are voting for this. And the reason why people are voting for it, the reason why these people are standing behind doing it, is because jobs. I got a job. Yeah, I can go build this highway, get a job. I got some money, can go get some beer after I do my job. I have talked with conservatives who continue to have delusion. We will always, we're always going to have oil. Like, what can be said? Global food crisis looms as fertilizer supplies dwindle. This is from National Geographic. Western sanctions on Russia, bad weather, export cuts from Eastern European chemical producers, all of these things have combined to create a severe shortage in agricultural fertilizers that have farmers scrambling to keep the world fed. Think the global fertilizer shortage is someone else's problem? Take a look in the mirror. If you are reading this in North America, Europe, Latin America, or Asia, chances are that the bundle of amino acids staring back at you is alive today because of chemical fertilizers. In fact, according to noted Canadian energy researcher Vaclav Smil, 2/5 of humanity, more than 3 billion people, are alive because of nitrogen fertilizer, the main ingredient in the Green Revolution that supercharged the agricultural sector in the 1960s. The chemical fertilizer trifecta that tripled global grain production, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, enabled the greatest human population growth the planet has ever seen. Now, it is in short supply, and farmers, fertilizers, companies, and governments around the globe are scrambling to avert a seemingly inevitable tumble in crop yields. I'm not sure it's possible anymore to avoid a food crisis, says World Farmers Organization President Theo de Jager. The question is how wide and deep it will be. Most importantly, farmers need peace, and peace needs farmers. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was a body blow to an industry that has been hammered by various events for more than a year. You see, they're trying to blame it on Russia, as always. Russia typically exports nearly 20% of the world's nitrogen fertilizers, and combined with its sanctioned neighbor Belarus, 40% of the world's exported potassium, according to analysts at Rabobank. Most of that is now off limits to the world's farmers, thanks to Western sanctions and to Russia's recent fertilizer export restrictions. Oh, so it's not actually Russia, it's the sanctions. Capitalism wins again, right? Oh, can I read more of this article? Is there more? No, I gotta do all this shit, forget it. Like, here's something I saw on our Ontario, right? Conservative voters, why will you be voting for Ford and the PCs? 118 upvotes. I'd say this is actually a pretty good look into the mindset. Okay, I'll bite. I may be attacked, but here it goes. I'm in the business arena every day in the sales work and sales world and speak to many people across Ontario. In the real world and outside this sub, people generally like Doug Ford. He's seen as a good guy who will fight for the average Joe. Right? So the propaganda works, people are schmucks. Ontario is a centrist province. No. And while we can argue until midnight of next year, the Ontario Conservatives are a centrist party. And outside of the 8 years of Mike Harris, the party has already been to the center. So outside of the most recent other ruler, right, the party has always been to the center. So the delusion is deep. The delusion is super deep. We're looking at a far-right radical party that is driving the species into extinction, and that's considered center. Great. Good stuff. He has not done anything radical in the past 4 years. Destroyed the basic income pilot project, destroyed 700 climate change related programs, attacked the elderly, attacked the vulnerable, attacked students. So the delusion runs extremely deep, right? He has not aligned himself with any crazy factions of the party except the party itself. He's not gone off the conspiracy edge like other right-wingers. He went along with science and vaccines. He stood up against the trucker convoy. He called the anti-vaxxers yahoos. While he was doing that, he also managed to attract business, along with federal dollars, to grow Ontario's economy. The last part is so important because while a lot of conservatives and socialists disagree is how wealth is created, and as a conservative, I still 100% beyond a shadow of doubt believe that the best social program is a job. A person going to work, feeling productive, being able to provide for their family and themselves without the assistance of anyone is very noble and makes people happier. So as I'm sure that this guy will feel super good about his position as the province begins to burn down. Like, the delusion runs deep. Like, we're really dealing with people who think Santa is real. Like, that's really where we're at. It is going to have to be like putting a fork in the socket. Like, they're just gonna have to do it. Here's another good one. So Canada Housing is a subreddit that I follow. It's steadily becoming more and more radicalized because people are beginning to realize, like, people initially joined this subreddit because they're like, housing is the problem. And now they're beginning to see and realize very clearly that we are ruled by an oligarchy that is going to destroy this place. Very straightforwardly. Canada, a nation of sociopaths? Despite our claim of being nice, kind, and polite, the reality is that just like in any modern society, psychopathy is what is valued most in Canada. There are many ways this can be seen, but since this is a housing sub, that is what this post is focused on. Canada's housing policy is one which encourages exploitation, where one is incentivized to outbid others and exploit rental income from the most vulnerable. The eviler you are, the better your life would be. It is also a society that thrives on people not looking out for each other. Homeowners could decide to help make things better by collectively refusing to sell to corporations, speculators, landlords, or foreign money launderers, sweatshop owners, and quote-unquote students. But they rather pursue their own profit instead of helping the community. Most homeowners, especially those of money or of an advanced age, rather keep their home values up than anything else. Community viability or the well-being of the next generation be damned. Mocking the young and poor rather than help them. That is the situation in Canada. A country where sociopathy, selfishness, and greed are seen as the highest good. Yes, the real sociopaths are the corporate class who exploit billions they don't even know what to do with while everyone is struggling. But let's not kid ourselves. Sociopathy has been ingrained throughout society, where screwing someone else is the path to success, as we all pay the sociopath's game of screwing other corporate serfs, while we aim to be slightly less exploited, with no regard to how much we exploit others in the process. Like, nailing it. Feel like the chat's pretty quiet today. Makes sense, man. Like these are the hard ones, right? These are the hard ones. Like this is a serious, serious crisis that we're in the midst of. And we're just not taking it seriously. We're just not. You know? Like for God's sakes, you got Oxfam. Pandemic creates new billionaire every 30 hours. Now 1 million people could fall into extreme poverty at the same rate in 2022. As the cost of essential goods rises faster than it has in decades, billionaires in the food and energy sectors are increasing their fortunes by $1 billion every 2 days. For every new billionaire created during the pandemic, one every 30 hours, nearly 1 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty in 2022 at nearly the same rate, reveals a new Oxfam brief today. Profiting from Pain is published as the World Economic Forum, the exclusive get-together of the global elite in Davos, takes place for the first time face-to-face since COVID-19, a period during which billionaires have enjoyed a huge boost to their fortunes. Billionaires are arriving in Davos to celebrate an incredible surge in their fortunes. The pandemic, and now the steep increases in food and energy prices have, simply put, been a bonanza for them. Meanwhile, decades of progress on extreme poverty are now in reverse, and millions of people are facing impossible rises in the cost of simply staying alive, said Gabriella Butcher, executive director of Oxfam International. The brief shows that 573 people became new billionaires during the pandemic, at the rate of one every 30 hours. We expect this year that 263 million more people will crash into extreme poverty, at the rate of 1 million people every 33 hours. Billionaires' wealth has risen more in the first 24 months of COVID-19 than in 23 years combined. The total wealth of the world's billionaires is now equivalent to 13.9% of global GDP. This is a threefold increase, up just 4.4% in 2000. Billionaires' fortunes have not increased because they are now smarter or working harder. Workers are working harder, for less pay and in worse conditions. The super rich have rigged the system with impunity for decades, and they are now reaping the benefits. They have seized a shocking amount of the world's wealth as a result of privatization and monopolies, gutting regulation and workers' rights while stashing their cash in tax havens, all with the complicity of governments, said Butcher. Meanwhile, millions of others are skipping meals, turning off the heat, falling behind on bills, and wondering what they can possibly do next to survive. Across East Africa, one person is likely dying every minute from hunger. This grotesque inequality is breaking the bonds that hold us together as humanity. It is divisive, corrosive, and dangerous. It is inequality that literally kills. Oxfam's new research also reveals that corporations in the energy, food, and pharmaceutical sectors, where monopolies are especially common, are posting record-high profits, even as wages have barely budged and workers struggle with decades-high prices amid COVID-19. The fortunes of food and energy billionaires have risen by $453 billion in the last 2 years, equivalent to $1 billion every 2 days. 5 of the largest energy companies, BP, Shell, Total Energies, Exxon, and Chevron, are together making $2,600 profit every second, and there are now 62 new food billionaires. Together with just 3 other companies, the Cargill family controls 70% of the global agricultural market. Last year, Cargill made the biggest profit in its history, $5 billion in net income, and the company is expected to beat its record profit again in 2022. The Cargill family alone now has 12 billionaires, up from 8 before the pandemic. From Sri Lanka to Sudan, record high global food prices are sparking social and political upheaval. 60% of low-income countries are on the brink of debt distress. While inflation is rising everywhere, price hikes are particularly devastating for low-wage workers whose health and livelihoods were already most vulnerable to COVID-19, particularly women, racialized and marginalized people. People in poorer countries spend more than twice as much of their income on food than those in rich countries. Today, 2,668 billionaires, 573 more than in 2020, own 12.7 trillion, an increase of 3.78 trillion. The world's 10 richest men own more wealth than the bottom 40% of humanity, 3.1 billion people. The richest 20 billionaires are worth more than the entire GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. A worker in the bottom 50% would have to work for 112 years to earn what a person in the top 1% gets in a single year. High informality and overload due to care tasks have kept 4 million women in Latin America and Caribbean out of the workforce. Half of working women of color in the US earn less than $15 an hour. The pandemic has created 40 new pharma billionaires. Pharmaceutical corporations like Moderna and Pfizer are making $1,000 profit every second from just the monopoly control of the COVID-19 vaccine, despite its development having been supported by billions of dollars in public investments. They are changing governments up to 24 times more than the potential cost of generic production. 87% of people in low-income countries have still not been fully vaccinated. The extremely rich and powerful are profiting from pain and suffering. This is unconscionable. Some have grown rich by denying billions of people access to vaccines, others by exploiting rising food and energy prices. They are paying out massive bonuses and dividends while paying as little tax as possible. This rising wealth and rising poverty are two sides of the same coin, proof that our economic system is functioning exactly how the rich and powerful designed it to do, said Butcher. Over 2 years since the pandemic began, after more than 20 million estimated deaths from COVID-19 and widespread economic destruction, government leaders in Davos face a choice: act as proxies for the billionaire class who plunder their economies, or take bold steps to act in the interest of the great majorities. One common economic sense measure above all will put this to the test: whether governments will finally tax billionaires' wealth. Oxfam recommends that governments urgently introduce one-off solidarity taxes on billionaires' pandemic windfalls to fund support for people facing rising food and energy costs and a fair and sustainable recovery from COVID-19. Argentina adopted a one-off special levy dubbed the Millionaire Tax and is now considering introducing a windfall tax on energy profits as well as a tax on undeclared assets held overseas to repay IMF debt. The super rich have stashed nearly $8 trillion in tax havens. End crisis profiteering by introducing a temporary excess profit tax of 90% to capture the windfall profits of big corporations across all industries. Oxfam estimated that such a tax on just 32 super profitable multinational companies would have generated $104 billion in revenue in 2020. Introduce permanent wealth taxes to rein in extreme wealth and monopoly power, as well as the outsized carbon emissions of the super rich. An annual wealth tax on millionaires starting at just 2% and 5% on billionaires could generate $2.52 trillion a year, enough to lift 2.3 billion people out of poverty, make enough vaccines for the world, and deliver universal health care and social protection for everyone living in low and lower middle income countries. Good recommendations, none of that's happening. None of that's happening. The liberals aren't going to do it. Conservatives aren't going to do it. The Democrats aren't going to do it. The Republicans aren't going to do it. The NDP aren't going to do it. Surround the halls of power. We've been abandoned. There's just no other way to describe this. This is abandonment. And it's going to be extremely costly. And the detached, psychopathic billionaire class, their solutions are literally escape to the bunker. That's literally their solution. Like, we have to end this shit. We have to end this shit. Eric's having a field day. I have talked with a conservative who continues to have the delusion. We'll keep going to have... Well, yeah, I mean, come on. I love how Economist keeps talking about it is the science of scarcity, but they never take the scarcity part seriously, ever. I had a debate with a person recently over loans forgiveness. For him, he thinks it will crash the economy, create a lazy population, where loans will become useless. Didn't matter to him after explaining how finance industry was relentlessly new industry, was making it poor people poorer, rich people. Yeah, no, like, it's worship. Like, we're dealing with people who worship money. So it's flat. Like, you can't convince someone who is this deluded. Like, they just need to experience the collapse at this point. Like, we're not living in a rational space anymore. Right? That the few voices that are even attempting to live in a rational space, that are attempting to articulate things in a rational way, are the extreme minority. Like 0.00000000001% of the population. It's an extreme minority that are actually attempting to know what's going on and talk about what's going on seriously. Everyone else is just living in kind of a deluded, like, why do you think the old, like, crystal energy shit has come back? Why do you think all of this, like, hyper focus on, like, the spirit of all of this kind of stuff is having a resurgence? Like, it is because people no longer are moved or shifted by reason or rational thinking. We're not capable of it. Like, we're using our gut. Compton's quite right. We have yet to do the number draw. Only 7 people watching, but 7 people. So 7. We got the number 7 is what I'm picking. Compton's in with a 6.
Here we go for today's number. It's May 25, 2022. 10 balls.
Got a 5 from Eric. 5, 6,
Each
7.
ball has
I like
a number. Numbers 1 through 10. Swirl the numbers.
Swirl the numbers. Grinning in with a 9.
Pick
Brandon,
a number.
we're going in with a 7.
Today's number is...
Here we go.
9.
You know what, Grinning? I knew it. The second you said 9, I was like, I bet it's a 9. I bet it's a 9. I knew it. I knew it. I should have said it out loud. I should have said, I bet it's a 9. No, because then the reason why I didn't is because I didn't want to steal your thunder, right? I didn't want to steal your thunder. It's all you, Grinning. All you. Man, I feel grumpy as shit right now. Like, I'm kind of in this weird spot where I'm like feeling kind of zen, feeling kind of like meh, but at the same time, like I just feel surly, you know? Surly maybe is the word, not grumpy. I feel surly. Like come on, you know? Like, this is how I'm feeling these days. Just like, come on, like, really? Like we're just gonna we're not even gonna do anything? We're just gonna shrug and give up? Like, oh, here's a fun one. All right, let's have a little fun. Just in case you guys thought that maybe the housing market collapse was, like, overwrought or whatever, check it.
This is how we went from 0 assets to $5 million in assets in our first 2 years in real estate.
When we first started, we didn't know anything about private lending. So we were actually using our own money, buying one property, refinancing, getting that money back, buying another property, which was really slow.
We got to the point where we maxed out how many loans we could have in our personal name, so we had to look for other alternatives.
That's when we figured out the private lending game, and we took off like a damn rocket. When we started using a private lender, it was the same process of buying, refinancing. The only difference is, instead of doing one house at a time and waiting to get our money back, now we're doing multiple houses at a time, refinancing, paying the private lender back.
Why are they confessing? They're not confessing.
They're bragging.
About to buy $1 million home for half the price. The thing is, you can only do this if you know how to utilize cryptocurrency. So this is the house that I'm gonna buy, and it costs about 1.4 million. So I'll have to pay around $7,000 a month. But for this entire house, the total that I need to pay is $740K. And it's because of crypto. On payment, I'll have to pay about 20%, which is $290K. With the remaining $450K, I'm gonna put that into the Anchor protocol. Once I deposit the $450K, it'll yield me 19% per year. That's $88,000 a year. Now divide that by 12 months, and that's gonna make me 7.3K a month. Just enough to cover the monthly cost of this mansion. After it's paid off, I'll have a $1.4 million home, plus be making 7.3K a month doing nothing. If you wanna learn more about crypto, check out my bio.
Talking about 2 loans on 1 house, right?
I have 5 houses and a condo.
Hey, there's a bubble.
How do you know?
The last time the global housing market collapsed, it was like economic devastation. There are some analysts. Hey Matthias, how you doing, bud? Like your new icon, dude. There are some analysts that say that the end of capitalism happened in 2008. The 2008 financial collapse was the true end of capital and the capitalist system. This next one, like, we are looking at a food crisis. We are looking at an economic collapse of the housing market. We are looking at a collapse of the dollar. All while a billionaire class is making more money than it ever has. I remember listening to Alan Watts talk where there was a story parable about how every star in the sky was a previous Earth-type world that had destroyed itself. Do you not think it's humanity's life tendency to destroy itself? I mean, that's kind of the question, isn't it? There is, built into the natural system, a life-death cycle. That the life-death cycle is obviously part of what is happening here. And just as humans, animals, plants, everything really experiences a life-death cycle, so too do civilizations and societies, that they experience a life-death cycle. And what we are experiencing and what we are witnessing and cataloging and attempting to deal with is a death cycle. But we are not in the life cycle. We are in the death cycle. That short video literally has just black-pilled me. Yeah. Like, it's over, guys. Right? Like, if you meet anyone who is walking around on this plane of existence saying that, oh, we're going to pull it up and the society's going to stabilize, it's over. It's over. It's over. It's just not, it's not going to get better. Like, it isn't. that our narrative is the narrative of the people who went through the Great Depression. That we are looking at a life now that is the life of the people who went through the Great Depression. That's the reality of what we're facing. That's the truth of what we're facing. Only this time, as we do it, we also have to face the complete destruction of the ecosystem. The only hope that I have in all of it is that the outcome from the Great Depression was a golden age. That the pressure exerted on the ruling class by communists and socialists forced them to capitulate to such a degree that it created a golden age in the society. The mistake, the error that the communists and the socialists made in that period of time is that once those concessions were given, they relented. Instead of actually going all the way and demanding a transfer of the means of production to the working class, which is what is required, which is what's completely necessary. No, I don't want to read an article that tries to attempt to calculate the capitalist death tolls. Like, I don't actually care that much about like the number figure, right? Like, it's always going to be ephemeral. Like, it's a lot. Like, honestly, I don't like, once you understand that World War I and World War II were capitalist wars, like, I don't know what you need. Like, I don't know what you need to see. Like, capitalist wars where the United States literally drops nuclear bombs on civilian populations. Like, the culture is psychotic. Like, committed a genocide against the First Nations people, is currently committing a genocide against Palestine, is currently committing a genocide against Yemen. Like, literally just, like, invades Iraq, invades Afghanistan, destruction of Libya, Yugoslavia. Like, do I need an exact number? No, not really. Like, I just found out the other day that if you're on OW and are homeless, you don't get the shelter allowance, which is like half of the regular benefits. Yeah, Matthias. Yep. Like, what we're doing is disgraceful, and we're voting for it. Like, it's just disgraceful. Oh, this is a fun one. How we know things are actually in the shitter, guys? Strippers say a recession is guaranteed because the strip clubs are suddenly empty. Cardi B worked at a strip club for 3.5... I don't care about Cardi B. Some strippers on Twitter said they think recession is guaranteed because the strip clubs are suddenly empty. On Thursday, a woman who goes by Bodice El Bimbo on the platform said the following about clubs. The strip club is sadly a leading indicator, and I can promise y'all we're in a recession. LMAO. Me getting stock alerts just to decide whether it's worth to go to work, she further wrote in a subsequent tweet. People took to the comment section of her post to confirm her sentiments about the strip clubs, as well as their own experiences in other industries that seem to be declining. Nah, for real. Reading all these articles, journalists and economists are like, we're not in a recession. We might not even get one this year or next. Like, the club is dead, babe, one wrote. To be honest, I think we've been in a recession since fall 2020, another added. A third wrote, it's getting expensive out there. It's probably going to get worse, unfortunately, another added. Someone else, who's a mail carrier, wrote, I'm a mail carrier, and I've noticed the lack of volume of packages coming from one of my customers that has a home business. Shit's gonna get worse. SMH, someone added. According to data from the market research group Ibis World, it estimates that the profit for U.S. strip clubs has declined more than 12% to $1.4 billion in 2018, which is down from $1.6 billion in 2012. The research group also noted that the annual revenue growth at U.S. strip clubs was 4.9% between 2012 and 2017. It eventually slowed to 1.9% from 2013 to 2018 and is projected to face another decrease at 1.7% by 2023. Revenue in the industry is also estimated to have decreased at 17.4% at 2020. I know it sounds childish to focus on this, right? On strip clubs and things like this, but sex counts. Sex counts. And the technologies and the websites that tend to grow and do well are the ones that upon which pornography and sex exist on. Do you want to read the Jacobin article? Oh, yeah. Which one was that even? I've got quite a few here, actually. Like, we're so fucking... Which one was it that you're talking about, Eric? Was it the foreign military training? Capitalist freedom is a farce? Biden's little publicized Medicare privatization scheme is starting to raise alarm bells? Or perhaps there's a third one? Just as, like... I'm trying to report on some of the good news. Or some news that's not necessarily negative. If we lose the next one, we're done. Center-right group warns Conservative Party. So, this is actually a really interesting story. This is a really interesting one. Because, essentially, like, all political parties are coalitions, right? And are groups of groups. So, we've got one center-right group. Let's just read the article. If conservatives lose the next federal election, the future of the party will definitely be in the air, says former leadership candidate Rick Peterson. Peterson, an Alberta businessman who recently co-founded Center Ice Conservatives, an advocacy group for centrist voters, used a hockey analogy in an interview with the National Post to explain why he thinks conservatives should tread carefully as they choose their new leaders. You know what? Forget it. I don't got to read the whole fucking article. Literally, if the conservatives keep losing, they're going to start losing support from these groups. And if these groups start to break off and start to join other political groups and other political alliances, it could be the end of the Conservative Party here in Canada, which has happened before, right? You think about what happened with Mulroney. And as long as the Conservatives keep losing to an empty haircut that's not doing anything, which is Trudeau, they are going to break up and they're going to try to form something else up. Yeah, and I know there is this, isn't there, Matthias? What do we need the CPC for? The Liberals are doing their job better than they ever could. Exactly. Like, voting in the Conservatives is just going to be like a continuation. All right. Eric has asked, I shall deliver. Capitalist freedom is a farce. We know. By Rob Larson. Milton Friedman was wrong. Capitalism doesn't foster freedom. It produces autocratic workplaces and tyrannical billionaires. For all of the changes of the last 50 years, the conservative classics have held their place surprisingly well. Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom and Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom are still featured on Breitbart's online bookstore. Rush Limbaugh tells his listeners that Milton Friedman should be the Bible for young people, or anybody trying to understand capitalism and free markets. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, celebrates Hayek and Friedman in his book, while Ben Shapiro holds up Friedman as a conservative icon in National Review. But what then are the liberty and freedom that conservatives celebrate? And does capitalism advance or restrain them? Freedom is regarded so highly because, in a way, it contains all the pleasures of life. It's the ability to do what you want within the limits of material conditions and a human lifespan. However, you like to spend your time, whomever you love, whatever you like to work on or laugh at, all represent the tremendous value of social freedom. According to John Stuart Mill, the basic principle of freedom was that the only purpose for which power can be rightly exercised over any member of the civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin later described this idea as negative freedom, or freedom from coercion by others. Berlin also suggested a positive freedom, the freedom to do different things, rather than freedom from the choices of others. Instead of asking, what power centers control me, positive freedom asks, what am I free to do with the world's opportunities and resources? The traditional philosophical view of capitalism is that while it does not provide a positive freedom to a fair share of the world's production of goods, it provides a negative freedom from the economic tyranny by leaving consumers and workers free to choose among different options. This is the view of Friedman and Hayek, as they insist it's just the right kind of liberty. Many generations of capitalism's defenders have agreed. But any realistic review of the market economy reveals a different picture. Capitalism limits both positive and negative freedom. It fosters a huge buildup of private power by concentrating individual wealth and entrenching corporate control over markets, along with mercilessly destroying environmental systems, and thus the freedom of future generations. Capitalism not only fails to provide a positive freedom to a fair share of the economy, it fails to preserve negative freedom from the power plays of the 1%'s corporate property. When GM and Ford decide to desert cities like Detroit and Flint for poorer towns and countries, they denied their former workforce any positive freedom to enjoy the industry's enormous revenues the workers themselves had created. When Martin Shkreli's pharmaceutical company hiked the price of a life-saving patented drug from $13.50 to $750, effectively snatching it away from disease sufferers, it drove dependent users into poverty or bankruptcy, a frightening restriction of negative freedom. When Amazon held a sweepstakes to see which North American city would be blessed with its new headquarters, and mayors across the continent threw billions in tax concessions at the company's feet, Amazon wielded enormous power over the destiny of millions of people, laying bare how capitalist investment decisions can dramatically limit human liberty. Capitalism's defenders insist that, as Friedman and his wife Rose wrote in their book, Free to Choose, when you enter a store, no one forces you to buy. You are free to go or you are free to do so or go elsewhere. You are free to choose. They applied the same argument to workers. If you don't like your job or career, find another one. But other figures have seen the market's alleged negative freedom quite differently. Consider Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave and self-taught intellectual. He concluded, "Experience demonstrates that there may be slavery of wages only a little less galling and crushing in its effects than chattel slavery, and that this slavery of wages must go down with the other. The man who has it in his power to say to a man, 'You must work the land for me for such wages as I choose to give,' has a power of slavery over him as real, if not as complete, as he who compels toil under the lash. All that a man hath, he will give for his life." Here, Douglass was suggesting that markets allow the exercise of unaccountable power, the enemy of freedom. But how could a free person be enslaved to wages with so many different options for purchasing goods and finding different careers? One answer, as critics of capitalism have pointed out for centuries, is that markets concentrate and often tend toward monopoly. From the well-known Gilded Age monopolies in oil and steel to the Silicon Valley tech giants of today, the dynamics of capitalism generate unbelievable concentrations of private power. And while antitrust law is intended to constrain such monopolies, as the eminent economist Alfred Chandler pointed out long ago, commenting on the 1890 Sherman Act, at best, such statutes tend to create oligopoly, where monopoly existed, and to prevent oligopoly from becoming monopoly. Large agglomerations of unaccountable power, not the freedom-enhancing markets of Friedmanite fantasies, are the stuff of mature capitalism. Douglas's larger point, however, was that the market economies treat basic necessities as commodities to be bought and sold, including food and shelter. Capitalism compels people to find work in labor markets on such terms as they can find and subject to the tyrannical rule of jumped-up capitalist bullies, from Rockefeller to Bezos. This is a radical infringement on positive and negative liberty. In order to get the rudiments of life, most people must submit to the utter dictatorship of the modern workplace. The day-to-day schedule changes, the dressings down, the restrictions on freedom of speech. No wonder, Douglas added, as the laborer becomes more intelligent, he will develop what capital he already possesses. That is the power to organize and combine for its own protection. Collective organization by workers, that bugaloo of capitalist partisans like Friedman, was the true generator of freedom. But wait, Friedman and company say they have a trump card. Since the household always has the alternative of producing directly for itself, Friedman wrote in Capitalism and Freedom, it need not enter into any exchange unless it benefits from it. The power of exit restricts the potentially coercive power of the labor market. Yet Friedman's picture of the average family is so rosy, it borders on the oblivious. What he refuses to recognize is that producing goods typically requires capital, the tools and equipment used to make products. And capital is enormously concentrated. Inequality scholar Thomas Piketty has found that the richest 10% of U.S. households own 70% of total national wealth, and the top 1% alone owns 35%. Crucially, corporate stock, which represents ownership of the productive capital that's required to make goods and thus enable people to produce for themselves, is just as concentrated, with the richest 5% of households holding 67% of U.S. equities, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Somehow, the Chicago school nobelist fails to realize that the average individual, the individual around which his entire philosophy is allegedly based, is held hostage to the whims of those who own the productive economy, who can decide how wretched our work lives will be and which cities will get to have an economic future. From bleak times to ergonomics to maternity leave to acceptable workplace speech, the upper crust calls the shots and makes a mockery of capitalist freedom. Liberals, for their part, are often prepared to push for more positive freedom in the form of entitlements to health care, education, and a safe environment. But democratic control over investment and production would represent a far more promising model for liberty, since achieving worker control would replace capitalism's profit motive with solidarity, the drive to support and collaborate with our fellow men and women. Doing so would end giant firms' power to sweep the legs out from under a major city by relocating overseas, or to ruin their employees' work lives by speeding up production or surveilling them. Decisions made by cooperatives of workers, elected and subject to recall by their colleagues, could be made in a matrix of social solidarity, and thus significantly limit the power-mongering we're used to from today's corporate world. We on the left cannot surrender the language of freedom to the right. Having a critical analysis of capitalist corporations is great, but socialists must also promote the transformative potential of socialist freedom, both to inspire the hard work needed to change the world and to give our struggles a North Star. In The Road to Serfdom, Hayek grudgingly laments that the promise of greater freedom has become one of the most effective weapons of socialist propaganda. Hear, hear. I rather like how Chomsky talks about this issue of freedom. That, yeah, of course you're free. You're free to starve. Right? Work for us or starve. That's the arrangement. I hope you guys are all doing well out there. Nearly half of Canadians are finding it difficult to feed their families amid spiraling inflation. I don't know why anyone would defend this system any longer, right? Like, I just don't know what's going on in the minds of some of these people. Like, even on just like a basic, like, oh, that's unfortunate that like half the society is struggling to get food. Nearly half of all Canadians say they are finding it difficult or very difficult to feed their families amid spiraling inflation that has sent grocery bills skyrocketing, a new survey has found. The Angus Reid Institute surveyed 1,992 Canadian adults who are members of the Angus Reid Forum about their household finances and what they believe the Bank of Canada should do in response to a rate of inflation, which is now at a 31-year high. It found that 49% of respondents now report finding it difficult or very difficult to feed their families due to food prices that rose 8.7% year over year in March. That number is up from only 36% the last time Angus Reid conducted a similar survey in April 2019. It also appears that Canadians have an increasingly pessimistic outlook when it comes to their finances. The survey found that 36% of respondents reported being in worse financial shape than 1 year ago, compared to 24% who said that their finances had improved over the last 12 months. Another 39% that their finances were about the same, despite the rising cost of living. The proportion of respondents who believed their financial situation would be worse 1 year from now, 28%, also exceeded those who believed it would improve, 24%. While a plurality of respondents still felt their financial situation would be about the same, 38%. Angus Reid said the number of Canadians who anticipate a deterioration in their financial situation represents a peak in financial gloom for Canadians since 2010. Among the group, 63% said they expected to be worse off financially a year from now, and only 6% expected their situation to improve. At this stage, jobs are abundant. What the challenge is, of course, is people's ability to access disposable income in a way they have relatively to years past. So you're feeling squeezed because your grocery bill is now more, or you're blanching at the cost of a liter of gas. It is all those things layered on top of the potential either for rising mortgage rates down the road or higher credit card debts down the road. Angus Reid Institute President Shashri Curl told CP24 on Tuesday afternoon. It all represents a period of real uncertainty. Here's what the Bank of Canada should do. While the Angus Reid survey found a significant proportion of respondents are struggling with the cost of living, there was little consensus on the course of action that the Bank of Canada should take as it aims to bring inflation under control. However, the plurality of respondents, 45%, said that they would like to see the bank's key overnight lending rates kept at 1% for now, until it becomes clear how several recent hikes will affect inflation. Another 27% of respondents, you know what, man, honestly, what should the Bank of Canada do? The Bank of Canada should fuck off. Sorry, man, this whole point of what should the Bank of Canada do, corporations are hiking prices. What the fuck are you talking about? Who gives a shit what the Bank of Canada should do? Right? We should nationalize these fucking places. We should get rid of these stupid capitalists, right? These worthless parasites. The whole framing of the question, right? The whole framing of the question deflects attention away from the investor class in the first place, right? It's the Bank of Canada's responsibility, right? That's what's going on. It's just the Bank of Canada. Everybody pay attention to the Bank of Canada. Hyper-focus on the Bank of Canada. Pay no attention to the Thompsons. Pay no attention to the Pattisons. Pay no attention to the Irvings. Pay no attention to the owners, the people who actually own the place, right? Don't pay any attention to them. Hyper-focus on the fucking Bank of Canada, because that's what fucking matters, right? Yeah, the Bank of Canada is the one that's going to really solve this problem. No, they're not interested in solving the problem, right? What's happening is by design, and it's happening on purpose. That's really as simple as that. It's just it's happening on purpose. These guys have been saying for decades, the goal is to make sure that Canadians are unsettled and uncertain, right? We have them on the record. We have them on the public record. They talk about this stuff openly. Here it is. Like, here it is. Surround the halls of power. Like, stop fucking around. I'm just annoyed. Like, some millennials and Gen Z hit apocalyptic phase. They don't see a point saving for the future, and we're looking at the fucking Bank of Canada. Who gives a fuck? Like, who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? Like, so this is an article that comes from Socialist Action. This is by Barry, who I have on the show. I promised that I would read it. I find this article to be frustrating. I find it to be a frustrating article. Because we are at a point where leftists need to grab hands with one another. Like, we've got to organize together. Right? Like, we have to. There's no alternative. Like, it's ride or die now. Look straight up. It's ride or die now. A Cuban peasant said it best. We love Castro. Today we are more free because we have more life. That's beautiful. Yep. No, and like, just, you can see it in our media. You can see it all over our media. Blame anyone, talk to anyone, do anything. Just do not talk about the oligarchs. Don't mention them. Don't bring them up. Just don't talk about the fact that they exist, right? Be completely silent on the oligarch question. They aren't part of the conversation. That what's happening must obviously just be the natural shifts of a society. Like, no. Like, that, completely ignore that this is by design by an oligarch class. Just ignore it. Celebrate the 100th anniversary of the communist movement in Canada. It is important to emphasize the context in which the Canadian communist movement arose. The launch occurred in a tiny convention held in secret on a farm near Guelph, Ontario, on May 23rd, 1921. The new party was inspired by the Russian Revolution, and its militants did many great things in the early years. But the young Soviet Union was besieged by hostile imperialist armies. Russia suffered enormously from its isolation and economic backwardness. A bureaucratic party elite, represented by Joseph Stalin, seized control. It curtailed workers' democracy. I don't know what that is. Like, this is the thing, guys. Like, I did promise Barry I was going to read this, but, like, it curtailed workers' democracy. How? Stalin was elected. Like, it crushed socialist opposition. Like, when? Like, how did that happen? Crushed socialist opposition. Like, you talking about the Great Purge after the assassination of Sergei Kirov? And adopted a new program that over-adapted to capitalist rule outside the USSR. Like, prepared for an invasion by the Nazis? Is that what that means? Like, I'm just like... Like, it's this old way of talking about the USSR and about the Soviets and about communism. It's just like this old guard that wants to pass the baton of just divisive derision onto the next generation. And I just don't want to. I'm just not interested. Like, really. Like, I'm really, really not interested. Like, no, I don't. Okay, so Stalin and Trotsky had a fight, right? And there's critiques to be had of the Soviet Union. Okay. Like, all of those guys are dead. They're long dead. Like, we can learn from them. We can figure out what we should have done otherwise, but we can't learn from them if all we're going to do is demonize them. Like, I feel like I'm constantly in this state. Like, have you ever met somebody who just really hates their parents? They just really hate their parents. Like maybe they're 50, right? And they still shit on their parents, and they still say all of this like derisive bullshit or any of this kind of stuff, right? About their parents in the way that like a teenager does, right? And it's like, it's just like you don't want to admit that they're just people, right? That like your parents are just people. They're just trying their best. They're not gods. They're not like these overwhelmingly totally capable absolute superheroes that just decided to let you down, right? Like they're just fucking dealing with it as it comes. And once you get to a point in your life where you realize that, you actually kind of like your parents a lot more, that they actually become like pretty good people for the most part, or even if they are shitty, right? At least you can try to understand who they are from that perspective of just a base human. It's exactly how I feel whenever I get into this Trotsky Stalin shit. Like, Stalin's just a person. Trotsky's just a person. Like, these are people who are dealing with big problems the best that they possibly could, and like seem to do a pretty decent job of it, frankly. Like what the Soviet Union had to deal with was incredible, like fucking incredible, and the things that they achieved is incredible. Like they're the first people into space. Like I don't know what more you need. Like I don't know what more you need. Like, and I'm just out of patience for like shitting on other leftist movements at all. I'm just out of patience for it. Like and I'm happy to say, and I'm happy to bring it forward, that I think that's the red line for me. Like, we have to be coming together. We have to. We don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. The alternative is capitulation. And like most of the time when I see people, when I see leftists arguing amongst themselves, it's this nonsense. And it's just like, it's just you've picked a side, right? And yeah, nobody hates leftists as much as slightly different leftists. And I'm just over it. Like, the ecosystem is dying. The planet is going to see a famine. And we're bickering over whether or not, like, Stalin's ascension was legit. Like, who? Okay. Like, and, like, it's the fundamentalism that kills me the most. Right? Like, Stalin was elected. Like, he didn't come in with, like, an army and like, shoot Trotsky and seize power in a coup or something. He was elected. He won an election. Like, sorry. Like, sorry. Like, I feel like I'm watching a game of Survivor where the person, like, there's someone sitting beside me and they're rooting for someone to win. And I don't really have a horse in the race. I'm just enjoying the show. And their horse gets to the end and then loses. And then they spend all their time talking about how illegitimate the win for the person who won was, even though they won. And the rules of the game are literally just convince these people to vote for you and you win. That's it. That's the whole fucking rules of the entire game of Survivor. And there just comes a point where I got to look at these people and just be like, too bad. Too bad. Your guy lost. Like, your guy lost. Too bad. Like, I'm just done with this shit. I'm so fucking done with it. Because what does it do? It means that you get like a little pocket of these guys, and then you get a little pocket of these guys, and then you get a little pocket over here, and a little pocket over here, and none of them want to talk to one another. Because anytime they talk to one another, it turns into this shit. Like, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And this is like what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the childishness of it. Like, we have enormous problems in front of us. These problems are enormous. In terms of the scale, in terms of what needs to be done, in terms of all of this kind of stuff. And we're busy bickering about, like, Stalin didn't support the Cubans. Okay. Mocked with a 7, pissed off with a 2, and Emily with a 10. You guys are late to the game. We already drew it. It was 9, and Grinning got it. Grinning was the winner. Ding, ding, ding. Grinning comes in. He gets to gloat. I wish I could, like, put a little icon. Like, I wish I could put a little crown on this little guy's head or something. You know what I mean? You know what I mean, Grinning? Give you a little, like, little chutzpah. Yeah, if I was a capitalist, I would be over the moon about how socialists and communists talk to each other. I would be, like, over the moon. Well, onward to dystopia. Here's someone I haven't seen in a while. Hope you're doing good too, bud. Hope you're doing good too out there. I feel like I just had, like, a kind of a anger. No, I'm not going to finish Barry's article. No. I'm sorry, man. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I just can't, like... I'm sick and tired of this fundamentalist shit. I am. I'm sick and tired of it. Like, we get it. You don't like Stalin. We get it. You venerate Trotsky. Like, we get it. Like, I just don't think it's useful. I don't think it's interesting. Like, I find it to be annoying. Like, really, I just find it to be annoying. Like, and like... And then the article goes in and starts talking about other groups. And it's just like a gossip column. Like, no. I don't respect it. I don't. Like, I don't respect it. It's such a... Like... But, like... Even if this point, right, 100 years ago, done and dusted, put away, moved on, okay, right? But I'm of the opinion that, like, no, we still need to do a historical analysis on this, right? There's still lessons to be learned, right? There's still things that we can learn. There's still things that we can figure out. But we can't do that if we can't actually do that if our endeavor is to draw lines in the sand and divide ourselves among these kind of lines. You know, like, if it's one thing to look back and be like, oh, it seems to me that Stalin and Trotsky and Lenin were of this kind of character and that they were doing these sorts of things and they were structuring their economy in this kind of way and doing these sort of, like, but then to plant a flag and say, wait a minute, you think this about this thing, then I'm gonna push you away and we're gonna, like, I'm just like, why? Like, what is this? Yeah, most people just want to know who to hate. And, like, the more I interact with Trotskyists, like, the more I'm just like, man, what a major gift to the capitalists you guys are. Just, like, absolutely, imagine thinking Trotsky would have enabled liberal democracy in Soviet democracy if he was in charge. Well, I mean... I don't know, like, certainly things in the Soviet Union would have been different with Trotsky, but would it have been, like, so world-shakingly different? Right? Like, I gotta tell you, like, when I listen to these Trotskyists talk about Trotsky, the more and more I'm just like, sounds to me like what you guys are really talking about is just, like, war. Like, this idea of permanent revolution, the idea of empowering workers' groups, right? Like, literally, like... Aren't you just talking about war, right? Like, that what we're going to do is we're going to overthrow. Trotskyists actually genuinely believe that Trotsky would have somehow prevented World War II. You know? Like that somehow Trotsky would have dealt with Hitler in such a way so that. And it's just like a lot of wishful thinking and a lot of woulda, shoulda, couldas. And I'm just like, yeah, I guess that's like pissed off. Like it just is, but like, this conversation reminded me of my belief that debates are pointless because all they ever do is polarize people into corners and they never come to agreement. Yeah. I think Trotsky would eventually realize that he couldn't fight a war on all fronts against the British, French, Germans, Austro-Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Finns, etc. Well, yeah, and also I feel like Trotsky's in like Trotsky's writing from kind of a convenient position, don't you think? Like he leaves the Soviet Union, he can kind of write what he wants, you know? And of course he's going to talk shit about the guy that defeated him, you know? Like and I'm just like, Trotsky, Soviet effectiveness in a sea of liberal democracy, factionalism, get bent. He probably would have been just as bossy by necessity. Well, but this is another thing. Like, this is kind of what I'm talking about, is that, like, would things have actually been different under Trotsky rather than Stalin? I don't think so. Like, they're just men, right? They're just men. Like this is the thing that blows me away the most. Like Trotsky does not have the ability to reach into Germany and like just dredge up like a working class movement to fight against Adolf Hitler within the borders of Germany. Like it doesn't work that way, right? That leaders are often responding to forces that are well beyond their control. Right? And is this even this? Yeah, even if this question is important, right? And exactly, exactly. I just don't think taking the position, why shouldn't we look at Stalin as a man who was dealing with insurmountable odds and embarking on an incredible project, and genuinely ask ourselves how he did and what lessons can we pull and where can we actually find critique? And I just feel like there's this huge infusion of like just fundamentalist energy that just insists that literally everything Stalin did has to, by definition, be bad. And I just am like, that's completely not useful. It's just not useful at all. And yeah, rather than fighting each other, we should be fighting the actual bad guys. And literally the only reason I think we should talk about Stalin, Mao, Deng, any of these guys, is to be like, oh, well, we find ourselves in something of a similar situation here in this time. What did they do? How did it work? Did it achieve what they wanted it to? Were they able to actually move forward? Was it successful? How did they accomplish what they set out to achieve? What mistakes did they make? And how could we correct from those mistakes? But it's just like this fundamentalist view that everything that ever happened ever was bad and had to have been like a complete betrayal. It's just completely like you're just shutting off your critical faculties and you're just saying outright that we're going to be driven by an ideology primarily. And it's tiring. There was that meme going around Left Book a few years ago about how Stalin couldn't even read. So stupid. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, of course. I can't imagine why capitalists would want to do anti-Stalin rhetoric. Like, literally the leader of a challenging economy or an economy that challenges capitalist rule. Like, and the this anti-Stalin rhetoric, man. Like, someone pointed out to me fairly recently, because when you read Stalin's stuff, right? Stalin's written, right? Stalin has written stuff, and when I read it, it's like simple. It's not stupid, right? It's not clumsy or anything, but it is simple. And for a while, I was like talking this way of like, yeah, when you read Trotsky, like Trotsky's much more robust theoretically, obviously more intellectual, obviously like more exploring the kind of existential aspects of everything, right? More articulate than Stalin. But then someone pointed out to me recently, like, yeah, but Trotsky seems to be writing for himself, and Stalin seems to be writing for the people, right? Like, I imagine like a peasant, right? Like a semi-literate peasant, going around and trying to read Trotsky. And I'm just like, oh yeah, like probably going to be a tough go for him, given some of the concepts and some of the language that Trotsky uses. Whereas Stalin is like, no, I'm going to write for that person, right? I'm going to write for that person. Someone pointed this out to me about Stalin not that long ago, and I was like, oh yeah, that's probably right, you know? And probably part of the reason why Stalin was so successful. Because near as I can tell, Stalin was a man of the people, right? And he knew who these people were, and he worked with these people. Whereas Trotsky, I think, always saw himself as above the people, right? And you can see that in kind of how he operates and who he is, and the way Lenin critiques him, you know? And I'm just like, yeah, these aren't your run-of-the-mill capitalists. These are leftists who have read Trotsky and wear Bolshevik t-shirts, looking at you fight back. Fight Back's gaining a lot of power, actually, it looks like. They just had their conference. I've been seeing them on TikTok. They're getting a couple hundred people together. So they're gaining power for sure. And so is Socialist Action. They're gaining power too, right? See, my hope, and why that article was so disappointing, and it was very disappointing. Like, my hope is to try to get these groups in the same room at the same time, right? That's the hope. Get these groups, get Fight Back and Socialist Action and the communists and everybody in the same room at the same time. Let everybody see, like, how much people power we actually have together, and try to create some kind of arrangement or agreement between one another. And it's just not going to happen. It's like the conversation I had yesterday about the Freedom Convoy, right? That if your opening statement is "listen up, racists," you're done. It's over. And it's similarly, like, if your opening statement is "you guys like Stalin, so fuck you," it's over. Like, you're not going to get anywhere with this kind of attitude, and you're not going to get anywhere with this kind of communication. That it's fine if you think something of Stalin or something of Trotsky or something of Mao or Deng or any of these guys. That's fine. It is. Right? Everyone's got their own opinion of everything, right? And everybody's and it's of interest. I'm not trying to say it's not of interest or of any importance. But to open up with this volley of, like, you think this of this, and here's the flaws of these guys and all this, we can't possibly work together, then what are you doing? Then what is it that you're actually attempting to achieve? Like, there's no such thing as a political party or a political movement that has a kind of moral purity. It simply doesn't exist. It's all coalitions. It's all coalitions that work together. And it just seems to me like we should be trying to ingratiate ourselves to one another it just seems to me that we should be saying to one another, like, hey, the history of communism, like, the thing we should be focusing on is that we're all interested in communism. Like, this is the thing that I think we should be focusing on more than anything, is that we're all interested in communists and communism and leftism and leftists, that we're all interested in that. And the disagreements that we have about the perspective of history does not overwhelm the reality that we all acknowledge who our common enemy is, which is the system of capital. And I'm annoyed. Because, like, really, are we going to march towards this capitalist apocalypse? Like, really? We're going to march towards this capitalist apocalypse, head down, going to work, bickering about Trotsky and Stalin. That's really what we're doing. Staggering. Like, staggering to watch. And I'm just not going to participate in that. Like, if you want to help take down the capitalists and then deal with reality as it exists and deal with the problems that we're facing as they exist, then we can work together. But if you're going to push me out because I'm, like, not completely anti-Stalin, what the fuck is that even? Like, what the fuck is that even? Like, it's weird, man. It feels weird. Fight Back gains power by conscripting people from universities, which is, I don't know, I guess, okay. No, of course, that's a great way of going about it. That's really smart. Like, university kids, like, they should go to high schools. Like, get kids when they're 14, dude. Like, the system's not going to get better. Like, it's not going to improve. Kids know it. Like, get them when they're young. Get them now. And I don't know. I don't see anything wrong. Like, my only thing with Fight Back is that I've been trying to talk to them and trying to get somebody on the show, and I've been trying to organize with them, but it just doesn't, I don't know, just doesn't seem, like, it seems like the only way that they organize is by you've got to show up to their Congress. That seems to be the only thing, but I know that there are some leftists who doesn't want to even try doing left unity. I know Socialism for All is very much anti-left unity. It's just kept fundamentalist. Yeah, so what? So what's the point? Like, that's literally not how politics works. Like, politics is a coalition. All political parties and all political organizations of all sorts are coalitions. I think we should be teaching kids even before high school, which is why I'm working on children's books. Very nice. About socialism, you can't differ from that. I will admit, John, I felt more welcome at social and action events than at that Fight Back events. Yeah. No, and don't get me wrong, like, I mean, this is I know I'm just kind of bitching right now about this, but it's, like, they're good people. They're good people who are trying and they're fighting, right? But just, like, this alienation, like, we don't need it. We just don't need it. It's unnecessary. It's not. It's self-defeating. It's self-defeating. And, like, you kind of understand why it is that Stalin beats Trotsky, right? Like, it's very believable to me that Trotsky did things that were very self-defeating and alienated people. It's very believable to me that people within the Soviet Union looked at Trotsky and were like, yeah, I respect him and all, but, you know, I don't necessarily want him to be my leader. You know? Like, I kind of like this guy, Stalin, here. He seems calm. He writes in a way that's understandable to me. Stalin was certainly more charismatic as well. And I'm just like, this phrase, bureaucratic dictatorship. Bureaucratic dictatorship. This is a real nice Trotskyist phrase that gets a lot of traction for some reason. Bureaucratic dictatorship. Just kind of keep saying it and keep mulling this phrase, this idea, because this is what Stalin is accused of, maintaining a bureaucratic dictatorship. So what's the nature of the bureaucracy? Right? Well, the nature of the bureaucracy is it was a state organization, obviously, so they needed to control they did need a bureaucracy, but people would come together and they would vote. Oh. So there was negotiations, there was conversations, there was debates, and there were votes. So it was a democracy. A democracy in which Stalin won and stood atop. Like, there really just does come a point where I've got to say, too bad. Like, too bad. Like, sorry your guy lost. Like, too bad. Right? Like, all politics, if it's a democracy, which the Soviet Union was, right? All politics, right, is very simply get more people to vote for me than for you. That's it. And like it again, like Stalin didn't who'd Stalin shoot? Like when Stalin and Trotsky were going at it, like when they were vying to be the top dog, was Stalin walking around gunning people down? No. Like in the critique of the Great Purge, right, or the Great Terror, it's literally like, yeah, there was an assassination. Well, you think if Kamala Harris was assassinated, there wouldn't be some like enormous, you think the CIA and the FBI and like these enormous powerful institutions wouldn't embark on like a huge investigation? Of course they would. Like, of course they would. Stalin bad man, though. Just the most boring conversation I think somebody can have. It's just boring. Yeah. Like, do we not see what the stakes are right now? Like, do we not see what the stakes of the conversation are? Like, no, of course Trotsky was a bit arrogant and self-absorbed. Look, if you want evidence that Trotsky was arrogant and self-absorbed, it's the fact that after he lost, he left the Soviet Union. Like, yeah, the left's honestly, I think it does come. If I had to actually critique it, I in a deeper sort of sense, I think it really does come from the reality that, like, the left is full of people who have been betrayed. That leftists are largely the betrayed in the society. They're the people who have experienced betrayal from the capitalist system in a direct manner, right? And so that sense of betrayal persists and stays with us. So we're always looking, and we're always skeptical. We're always watching out for the dagger. We're always looking for, where's the betrayal coming? When am I going to get thrown over the side? When am I going to be the Trotsky in this group? Right? When am I going to be the one that's put overboard, right? And so we hyper focus on this minutia, and we hyper focus on these issues because it's a way for us to try to suss out who we think is going to betray us. I doubt the people out here trying to survive have thought about Stalin and Trotsky. Yeah, half of them don't even know who Trotsky was. Yeah. Like that's exactly the truth of it. Right? Like it really is just like, who gives a fuck? Like, half the people out here are trying to survive. Like, and it just kind of takes on like a Kirk versus Picard kind of thing. It really does take on that kind of feeling of just like, and this is where you're drawing your line in the sand. Like, your line in the sand isn't actually the capitalist death cult. Like, the line in the sand is Stalin or Trotsky. Like, it's annoying. It's annoying. And instead of taking an opportunity to talk about the history of communism and to try to frame it in such a way to say, like, we need to be framing communism in a positive light, right? That, like, the Soviet Union had resounding successes, right? There were resounding successes in the Soviet Union that are obvious. Like, the Soviet Union was a fucking monarchy that in the space of a single generation became the most powerful industrial power on the planet, capable of defeating the Nazis, and were the first people into space. Like, it managed to create an egalitarian society from this, like, backward feudal space, right? And of course, did it persist? No. And there are lessons to be learned, obviously. But I don't know why, as communists, we want to spend all our time looking at exclusively the negatives when there are obviously positives. There are obviously things that occurred in the Soviet Union that were beneficial to the people. And there were obviously things that we should be pointing to. And I don't know why we wouldn't want to spend our time talking about those things. And talking about, like, how communism did benefit its own people. Which it obviously did. Yeah, most people don't have the energy to read theory, yeah. Then you have the anarchists who shout about authority bad, yeah. I mean, anarchism is it makes sense to me. Like, I respect it, I understand it. Like, my only break with the anarchists is simply, like, anarchists want to do away with the state kind of in one thrust, and I'm just like, you can't. Like, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. Yeah, I look forward to arguing about Trotsky as we eat radioactive squirrel stew around scrap fires in the afterscape. Yeah. Not squirrel stew, cockroach blocks like in Snowpiercer. Ugh. One thing I find so hypocritical, people keep saying that communism has failed because of the USSR while other socialist countries, while ignoring how capitalism came to be. Yeah. Well, and like this idea that, like, communism has failed. I'm like, has it? Like, the Soviet Union, like, the first country to ever try like this mass experiment with communism, like, of course it was going to eventually collapse. Like, of course it was going to. It was literally the first shot, right? And it didn't collapse under its own weight. I think this is something that people don't respect about what happened in the Soviet Union, is that unlike capitalist systems, which collapse under their own weight, right, that are designed to collapse, that repeatedly collapse over and over and over again, the collapse of the Soviet Union was political. It was done from within. It was purposefully done. It didn't collapse because it became an economy that ceased to be able to function the way that the way that capitalism collapses repeatedly over and over again. I've experienced 3 in my life, right? The collapse of the Soviet Union happened because the people who came after Stalin didn't actually care about the communist project, and they capitulated to neoliberal capital. So it's completely political, right? So when people say that communism fails, it's like, well, no. Like, communism was sold out in the end. That the ideas of communism were given up on by the leadership of the country. And they were given up on because the leaders wanted to join the neoliberal project, right? They wanted to be part of an oligarchy. And the true critique of Stalin, right? And of course you can critique Stalin, like, it's fine, but the true critique of Stalin is that he didn't make institutions to survive his own death, right? That the project of communism 100% ends when Stalin dies, because the people who precede him completely sell it out. Like, completely sell it out. And it's a lesson that the Chinese really learned, right? And again, so this idea that communism collapsed or doesn't work or all this kind of stuff, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, the Chinese clearly looked at the Soviet Union and clearly were like, my favorite, it was Deng. He said of Stalin, it was like, Stalin did like 70% right, 30% bad. And I'm like, that's the way to talk about these guys, right? It's not to be like, oh, what a terrible and this and that kind of thing, but like, to be like, no, like, these are their mistakes and this is what they did right, and like, we can learn from all of this. And the Chinese clearly learned from this idea of institutional power, right? That Stalin didn't manage to create an institutional power to last past his death, whereas the Chinese have, right? They created an institution, the National People's Congress, which is designed to, on purpose, maintain ideas of communism and socialism in order to continue this project forward past the original generators, past Mao, past Deng, past Xi Jinping, past all of them, right? That it will continue and adapt and evolve, and new ideas will come out. And most of the time when people critique China from the communist perspective, they're doing it because they're fundamentalists, theoretically. And the Chinese aren't. The Chinese really are just like, we've got a problem to solve. How do we solve this problem? While maintaining kind of these Marxian principles and ideas, right? I actually know many anarchists who are starting to rethink, can we actually abolish the state in one fell swoop? Even me, who consider being a Christian anarchist, I've been pondering that question. I've been thinking more and more that I don't think it's physically impossible to truly abolish the state. My position on this idea of abolishing the state, right? Like, I don't think it can be done. Like, the more I think about what is the state, how does the state operate, what is it for, how, like, if you were to do away with the United States government and like the deep state and all of this, well, then the state becomes whatever coalition the corporate power structure raises, right? Like, the state is always going to be the center of power, right? And so the question is, do you want to maintain a state on purpose and mitigate how much impact it actually has on the society on purpose? Or do you want to just allow some power center to be erected by the force of its existence, just because of free market capital or free market principles? Just chaos, right? And I kind of take a look at the way the Chinese are doing it, And I kind of think, like, that's not so bad. Like, they elect representatives into the National People's Congress, but then those representatives are trained. And there's a huge training process, right? Like, they don't just say, like, oh, you got elected from this, like, you got elected governor of Florida, so now you get to write laws for Florida, right? Like, that's not what they do. They say, okay, like, you're from Shanghai, right? You're here. So now we're going to send you to a village of 1,000 people. Govern that for a year. We'll talk to you about it. We'll see what we think about how that went, right? And it's also a good way to vet out corruption, right? It's also a good way to vet out, like, the kind of people who are just in it to be like, oh, I could become the leader of this and make $1 billion, build a highway, right? Siphon a bunch of money away from the people and walk away from the explosion, right? The way that Doug Ford is doing, right? And so they've built an institution with the idea behind it that we're actually going to train people. We're actually going to teach people what governance is and what this service is, with the hope that this system itself exists in order to, first of all, be responsive to the people themselves, right? The people who are actually electing these people in the first place, but also to shed off and eliminate the corrupting elements. That's the hope, right? Will it be successful? Only time will tell. But it's a grand experiment, just like these all are, right? Like the American system of governance is a grand experiment. It's an enormous experiment. One that has pitfalls built in. Good to see you, Victini, man. Good to see you too, JR. Disobey causality. We are quantum. I don't know if I understand that, but I like your energy. Hard for us, born in capitalism, to manage the abolishment of class and state. The generations post-capitalism will have a clearer view, in my opinion. Well, I mean, the destruction is going to make it easier for people, right? That one of the things I've been saying over and over again, right? Like, we aren't going to need to convince people. I think that's the big one. And that's what makes this article that Barry wrote so frustrating to me, right? It's like, at this stage in the game, we don't need to convince people, right? Like, we need to build our own power. We need to collect ourselves and get together. And if people who want to come on board, right? And the people who find us, right? They're not people who have been convinced. They're people who already think this way, but who have been isolated. So we're not convincing them. They're just finding us. So the goal isn't to spread this stuff around in order to try to convince anybody. Quite the opposite, if you ask me. It's to find the people who already think this way, right? To form ranks, to form power. And we shouldn't bother spending any energy whatsoever on trying to convince people, because nothing is going to be more convincing than capitalism itself. There's no force on the planet that will be more convincing to the populace that we have to get rid of capitalism than capitalism itself. And so we shouldn't spend a moment of our energy trying to convince anyone that capitalism is bad and that there are other ways of doing things, because the system that's going to do that work for us is the system of capital. That we just need to exist in a state that doesn't appear frightening. That's it. We just need to be accommodating and welcoming. We need to appear rational. We need to appear reasonable. We need to appear as though we are capable of addressing issues as they are put towards us. That's all we've got to do. Because as capitalism, like, I take a look at the Canadian housing subreddit that I'm on, the Canadian subreddit. I've seen it very quickly go from just a bunch of yobs who are just like, housing's tricky. Oh, things are tricky in the housing market. I'm a bit upset about the housing market. Aren't you a bit upset about the housing market? Yeah, things are... You know what we should do? We should just pass a piece of legislation that says we should rezone this thing. Oh, we should just do this minor reform. And I've seen that subreddit go from that to literally being like, oh, we've been abandoned by an oligarch class that's actually trying to destroy us. Actively. I've watched that transition occur. And it wasn't because I was on that subreddit being like, oh, it was because these guys see reality. They're just like, they started this by being like, I'd like to buy a home and I don't seem to be able to do that. And then they've pulled that thread and now they're looking at it being like, oh, it's oligarchy. Oh. And now I'm starting to just say to these guys, like, hey, there's a YouTube channel over here. And some of them are being like, oh, okay, what's this YouTube channel? Right? Incidentally, let people know I exist. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Tell all these kinds of stuff. But if all we're going to do is bicker about Trotsky and Stalin, like, it's not going to fucking matter. It's not going to fucking matter. Like, it's not going to fucking matter. Like, the people who are experiencing these hardships, like, they want something serious. Right? They want something serious. Because what they're experiencing is quite serious. Like, imagine. And I've known that this was going to happen since I was a teenager, so I gave up on this pursuit almost immediately. I remember telling this to a teacher and him looking at me like I was like, well, that's what are you even talking about? It was like flabbergasting to him. But I've known since I was a teenager that I was never going to own a house. That if I was going to own a house, it was going to come through a type of sacrifice that I wasn't interested in making. And I look at all of the people who have managed to get property and get houses, and they're doing it at a great personal cost. It's costing them their entire lives. Right? And imagine being a person, and I have plenty of friends who are like this. Imagine being a person who has sacrificed a lot and has put in all the time and got the education and did all the right things, and now you can't get a house. Like, get fucked. Get completely fucked. Right? And it's going to get worse. It's going to get more obvious. It's going to get more aggressive. And if we want to actually gather power and gather those people together, then all we got to do is present reasonable arguments that are rooted in reality and in the real experience of their own lives. And that's what's going to do it. I get it. Quell fear, and we just act on self-preservation in the hyper-capitalist framework. We get afraid, we get upset, we want change, push the fear down, and self-preservation becomes paramount. People are feeling more and more cheated and more disaffected every day, despite living in the best country every day. It's sad that things have to be worse for more and more to realize it. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of it comes down to the isolation. That's what it is, right? If you're isolated, right? If you're isolated and the people around you are just telling you to work harder and just buck up, then and you're getting gaslit, right, by a culture that gaslights, then you can start to think that it's a you problem, right? You can start to think that it's just you. But this channel proves that it's not just you, right? There are a lot of people who are like this. There are a lot of people who are starting to think this way. And I highlight those people and talk about those people because, yeah, I notice this tendency in myself to intellectualize horrifying things as a coping mechanism. Like this mass murderers this last week in the States, yeah? It's so horrifying, I don't know how to empathize. And the mass murderer stuff, I wasn't even talking about that today. but like it has become normalized. Like we are just so aggressively numb to it, right? We're just aggressively numb. Yeah, they've militarized the police to confront this possibility. Yeah. No, but I mean, like, it, in my view onward, it's an inevitability, right? Like, this is something that I'm kind of acutely aware of, having spent a lot of time paying attention to protest movements and how they function and how they work. They are unpredictable, and you never know when they're going to come. And you sort of think that there's going to be a spark, right? There's going to be a spark, and then that spark, like George Floyd. The George Floyd protests were like this, where there was a spark that lit the flame, right? But sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's not really a spark. Sometimes it just kind of happens, and the organizers don't understand it either. Right? They don't understand why things have happened the way that they have happened. They don't understand. Right? And so it's just up to us to keep at it and to keep hoping that it's... I mean, I'm more or less of the opinion that a big reason why the capitalists don't want to do basic incomes or a 4-day work weekend or all this, or 4-day week or any of this kind of stuff, is because they want us to be exhausted. Right? That I think that there is actually a lot of energy. There is a lot of energy people want to spend protesting. I think people want to protest. I just think they're exhausted. Like, everybody's working all the time, and they can't get the energy to even go out and do anything. They can't get the energy to go out to clubs. They can't get the energy to go out to enjoy their lives. That like just going out for a walk on the beach is hard enough, right? Because we're constantly in this overworked state, and you can never. So they'll never give us any reprieve from this. Yeah, the left won't even protest our funding this war. Yeah, exactly. Then liberals are somehow surprised when some people fall into the mindset that allows people to drift into madness, like mass shootings and QAnon. Yeah. No, like that's... I completely understand QAnon. Like, QAnon makes total sense to me. Like, the world no longer makes sense. The world makes no sense whatsoever. Right? All of the narratives of American capitalism have shown to be complete and total farces and lies. And so, of course, people are retreating into these kind of fictional narratives and these sort of fantasy-based narratives, because these narratives are at least attempting to make sense of, like, the QAnon people have at least said something's gone wrong. Something's gone wrong, and they're trying to make sense of it, and they don't know how to, right? They don't know how to. And so, of course, they come up with just, like, these incredibly insane narratives, right? And then the movement's gotten big enough now that there's just a bit of I shouldn't say a bit, but there's tribalism to it, right? Like Trump, the election was stolen from Trump, right? I don't think, like, it completely doesn't matter to them at all whether or not the election was actually stolen from Trump, right? Like, they'll say it matters, but it doesn't actually matter, right? Like, as long as you're saying that, then you're on side, right? You're in the in-group. So what matters far more than the reality of whether or not Trump had the election stolen from him is simply the language. Is simply, if somebody goes, like, Trump had that election stolen, you go, ah. And nobody cares if you stand up and go, well, actually, guys, that we've done a lot of research on this, and it turns out that, Trump did lose that election legitimacy. And also, because that's missing the point. That's missing the forest for the trees, right? Like, they don't care. They don't care. Like, you could literally show them all the evidence in the world and show them all the stuff. It doesn't matter. Because that's not what it's about. It's not about whether or not Trump did actually lose or win the election. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about the language that you're speaking. It's about the energy you're putting into it. It's about getting on side and being in the tribe. That's what it's about. In terms of American gun culture, the frog has already been boiled. It's now a brown scum they call Freedom Scoop. God forbid you think it tastes bad. Yeah, the Victini, for me to put on my actually cap. Actually, you know what's funny about this frog boiling analogy? Like, the analogy is that if you put a frog in water and steadily turn up the heat, it'll eventually boil without noticing it. So we ran the test. Frogs jump out. Frogs jump out. Frogs are smarter than people. Right? If you put a frog in water and you steadily increase the heat in an effort to boil the water without him noticing it, eventually the frog will go, golly gee, it's getting hot in here. I'm going to leave. And it does. Frogs are smarter than us. There are some leftists who tries to argue that Putin is evil and did an unprovoked attack and there's no Nazi problem in Ukraine, etc. Not really leftists then, right? Like, even the left, like, you have to, I think, to maintain, like, your leftist cred in regard to this, you've got to at least be talking about the NATO encroachment line. Like, you got to at least be talking about the NATO encroachment line, right? Like, to say that it was an unprovoked attack, like, I don't think you can genuinely maintain that credibly. Like, of course it was provoked. Like, it was obviously provoked. Like, even if you just follow, like, the most reduced line, like, even if you just follow, like, the Chomskyan line, right? Like, Chomsky's analysis on the situation isn't very robust, in my view. But it's still an important analysis because it's an analysis of NATO, which he's been analyzing for quite some time. And even, like, the Chomskyan analysis is like, yeah, like, NATO encroachment, and the Russians have been saying for years, like, this is a red line. Like, so even from that kind of basic perspective, and that's not even talking about the coup, that's not even talking about the invasion of Donbass or the bombing of Donbass for 8 years. Like, what are you talking about unprovoked? Like, it's just nuts. And I just don't think you can maintain your credibility without addressing these issues, right? It's an Al Gore reference. Yeah, Canadian liberals buying Ukrainian diaspora vote. That's right. That's right. Well, I mean, I think it's actually worse than that, Victini. I don't think it's that they're buying the Ukrainian diaspora vote. I think the Canadian liberals, like, a big part of their coalition is the Ukrainians. Like, Chrystia Freeland is part of that Ukrainian diaspora. Like, her grandfather was a Nazi collaborator, right? For that helped with the Ukrainian Nazis, right? Like, she's part of, like, this Banderite far right. Well, I shouldn't say part, but she definitely knows about them and has posed with them. So she's part of this, like, Ukrainian diaspora, right? She's the deputy prime minister, for God's sakes. So it's less about them buying the vote and more about them doing what they want, right? That the liberals are doing what the Ukrainian diaspora wants to do because they're a major part of their coalition. Russiagate did so much damage to this country, dude. Yeah, dude. Like, when we talk about, like, major conspiracy theories and major, like, we always talk about QAnon. QAnon gets a lot of attention, right? But Russiagate, Blue Anon, was way, way worse, in my view. Like, did way, way more damage to the culture and the society than QAnon did. Because, like, QAnon is like it's a group, but it's like, if you're not on the in group, it's obviously kooky, right? Like, QAnon is like, I feel like your positions can only legitimately be QAnon's the greatest thing that ever happened. QAnon's a curiosity and a cultural interest, and that's kind of the position that I take. Or QAnon people are weird, dangerous, lunatic types. Those are sort of the three general positions, right? So you'll notice that it's everything we say is true. You guys are probably not telling the truth. You guys are probably definitely not telling the truth, right? Those are sort of the three positions. BlueAnon, with this Russiagate, you've got Russiagate is 100% real, and then you've got Russiagate might be real, Russiagate's probably real, Russiagate's not real. And if you're here, all three of the other groups will dogpile you and call you a Russian propagandist. It's much more damaging. It's much more damaging. It's much, much harder to break through to the bulk of the populace and say, hey, this isn't true, and have them actually listen to you in the Russiagate situation. And of course it's funneled into this present moment where Putin has invaded Ukraine. And so all of that Russiagate shit, instead of people being at all interested in any evidence, facts, truth, anything. Like, for God's sakes, I recently had a guy who, for whatever reason, I can't explain this, but it was really weird. He was desperate to try to convince me that Putin was a bad man because he had a palace. And I kept saying to him, okay, first of all, can I see a source? But second of all, who gives a shit? Like, so what if he does? Like, Putin's the leader of a major economy. Like, who cares? Like, oh, he lives in a palace. Who gives a shit? And then the guy kept sending me articles that were like, allegedly, supposedly, we aren't able to verify this. And I'm like, so about this issue that I don't give a fuck about at all, you're giving me sources that even the people who are telling you are saying, like, yeah, we can't really verify it. So it's all just shade throwing. And the guy was just like calling me like a Putin simp and all this kind of stuff for not like taking just trust me, bro, as a source. And on the lowest possible stake conversation that you can have. That I literally said to him, like, I genuinely don't give a fuck if Putin has a palace. Like, who gives a fuck at all? Doesn't matter at all. 0%. Like, what, you think Justin Trudeau doesn't have a nice house? Like, what the fuck do you think is happening here? But it's just like this. But the truth doesn't matter. Right? We live in a post-truth world. What matters is that you say the right things. And that you just get on side. So that everybody knows you're part of the tribe. And it doesn't matter if it's real. It just matters that you say it. Fun fact, the communist leadership and Putin are using the same offices which are located in the old Tsar Palace. My source is the interviews with Oliver Stone where Putin shows his home to Oliver. I mean, again though, Eric, like, I just don't care. You know what I mean? Like, Putin's the leader of a major economy. I assume that he has a nice place. Like, I assume, you know, like, I don't care. It's overtly irrelevant to me. You know what I mean? Like, have you seen George W. Bush's ranch? Have you seen Obama's house? Have you seen Biden's house? Like, and I just don't think it's scandalous at all. I'm literally like, yeah, they're the leader of the country. Like, honestly, if the leader of my country was living in a shithole, if he was like living in a shack, or if he was living in just like an apartment or something, I literally would say, hey, can we get this guy a nicer house? He's the leader of my goddamn country. Like, come on. Like, that's my position. Like, If the leader of my country doesn't have a nice house, then I want us to give him a nice house. Like, he's the leader of the and that's true even if I think he's a piece of shit. I want Stephen Harper to have a nice house. I want George W. Bush to have a nice house, right? Like, you can hate these people, but they're still the leader of goddamn countries. Like, they're still, like, I don't know, like, for fuck's sake. They're still supposed to be representative of our country. And if they're living in shitholes, then I'm going to be like, maybe we should make sure that they're in a nicer place. If we can't get a nice place for the leader of the country, then what hope do the rest of us have? Unless they're actually genuinely going to stand out and say, I'm not going to get a nicer house until everybody else is in a nicer house, and like they make it like a big thing, then I'm going to be like, yeah, all right. But like, for fuck's sake. For fuck's sake. Oh, I understand. I wasn't trying to say Putin to Batman. I'm just trying to say Stalin and Putin are using the same offices, and I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, like, I wonder when the war is really going to break out here. Like, that's what I'm really coming down to. Like, when is it really... Like, we're seeing an increase in school shootings. We're seeing an increase in mass shootings, rather. And it's... Several people in the chat, myself included, are now at a place where we're just not having an emotional response to it anymore. Because it's no longer... It no longer has the emotional weight or the emotional power anymore. It doesn't matter emotionally to us anymore because it's become normalized. It's become part of the situation now. You know what I mean? Like, it's just part of being alive in North America is hearing about these shootings, seeing the pictures. Like, it's just another thing. And we know nothing's going to get done about it. We know no one's ever going to do anything. We know that no legislation is going to get passed. They literally might as well just have robots in office and they just hit a button and have like a Democrat robot stand up and be like, we must now do something about gun control. The problem is not guns. The problem is bad people. We should educate. We should treat this like a mental health issue. Ba 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 ba. Bow. Depower. For all it matters, it's not doing anything, right? Like, these guys, and they don't care. Like, that's the big thing, right? Like, they don't actually care. And so, if it's just going to be a part of the world now, right? It's like a natural phenomenon at this point. You know? It's like, oh, there was a tornado in Tornado Alley. Yeah, it's called Tornado Alley. Like, it's like I look at the people who had their houses blown up for the third time in Tornado Alley, and I think, well, that sucks, but it's Tornado Alley. And it's just kind of getting to be the same thing in America. And yeah, is the problem guns, or is America just a miserable place where life is cheap and a large segment of the population secretly wants to die? Yeah, it's getting to be less secret. Like, it's getting to be less and less a secret. Like, insider article right in front of you. Some millennial and Gen Zs have hit an apocalyptic phase in which they don't see the point in saving for the future. It's really easy for me to see how, like, a kid could just be like, let's go. Let's just fucking blow some shit up. Like, it's easy to see. Doesn't take a genius to figure us out. And it's just like the letter that you read last week about that girl who committed suicide, nothing is going to come out of it, setting up another person who will lead to the same consequences. It's just like if and here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing about these mass shooters, right? And I don't hear anybody actually saying this out loud. Is like, it's only a matter of time until some of these guys Some of these guys who have this inclination to commit a mass shooting and all of this start to realize that instead of doing like a small scale, me and my buddies going into a school and shooting it up, we should form something more serious. Something like Fight Club, right? It's not difficult to imagine a bunch of young men pulling a Fight Club, right? And just like trying to make it bigger, trying to get a bigger thing to happen, right? And like we are facing a reality. Like, institutional power is on the decline, right? In the United States. People don't respect it. People don't care that much, right? And they're looking to each other for support. And so what is that going to do? It's going to mean that you're going to have gangs, right? That America is going to, by and large, be run by a series of gangs because the state is so unresponsive to their needs. So, because the state is so unresponsive, well, then people who are willing to grab guns and seize control will and do and are. What's hilarious is QAnon is a Rorschach and propagandized white supremacists projecting their own meaning on it. Yeah, that seems to be how it is, right? And but again, I just don't think it, like, the truth doesn't matter anymore. The truth doesn't matter anymore. It's all emotions. It's all emotions. The thing that I don't like about that title is that many people who are in our situation is that we can't even save up in the first place. It paints the picture that we can, but in reality, we can't. Yeah, I see what you're saying, Eric. That it's like, it's once again, it's blaming millennials and Gen Z, saying that, oh, they could save, but they don't see the point. Whereas the truth is like, no, we can't even save. Like it's not that we can and we choose not to. It's that we know we can't. So why bother trying, right? Like, how many times do I need to see someone's savings get wiped out? How many times do I need to see an economic collapse? How many times do I need to see like article after article saying that we're heading towards like a collapse? The frog thing, but it's a great analogy despite its scientific inaccuracy. Oh yeah. No, I understand that, Victini. Like it's like we are, and the thing I like, but the only reason I told that story was not to correct you, is just to say in the end that frogs are smarter than we are. That like a frog gets to the point where it's like, oh, this is hot, I'm leaving. And we are going to be like, oh, this is hot. Let's fucking go, bro. Let's more. Let's go more. More of this. That's all. We are dumber than frogs. Freedom soup. Well, guys, I think I've gone overtime here. God help me, I don't know why I went overtime today, but I did. Man, it's so nice that you guys are here. It really is. So nice that you guys are here. You really ease my mind on a lot of this, you know? Like these are tough conversations. These are tough things to hear and tough conversations to have. And I'm really, really glad you guys are here for it. Because I know for myself, like, I think back about how it was going through the Iraqi invasion. And it was the isolation that really was the worst. That I always felt very isolated. And so I was constantly trying to connect somehow, in some way, in order to alleviate that isolation, or at the very least, justify or somehow find meaning in that isolation. Whereas now, with the madness that's occurring all around us, I feel better. And I feel better because I'm not isolated. That we may be separated by distance, but we stand together in solidarity. And that means the world to me. It matters so much to me to know that there are other people in the world who are fighting the good fight, who are trying to find out what's real and what the truth is, and who are trying to acknowledge and live in the truth. Even just attempting to do it means so much to me. Please remember to like, share, subscribe. Send $1 my way if you've got it. My Patreon's down below. Gets you into the Discord. Tell people I exist. Tell your friends. Tell your family. We got to start planting our feet on the truth. Or at least attempting to. Always remember, guys. Each and every one of you is a quantum being. Walking around in quantum energy. The billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes that you'll never realize it and you'll just stay the good little commodity. And they need you to be. Revolt. Rebel. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.